Hi, this is John Cullen. Welcome to another episode of Hypothetically Speaking. In this episode, I'm joined once again by Dr. Dave Collum from Cornell University. Dr. Dave, good to have you back on the show. Thanks for joining me once again.
Thrilled to be back. We have to quit meeting like this.
Exactly. Well, we had an opportunity to talk a couple weeks ago. We spoke about the Vegas shooting, and we spent about 2 hours talking about that. And those videos I put up on my YouTube channel, and they've been very well received. I think people really enjoyed listening to the discussion, and I put a bunch of interstitial material as we were talking in between the conversation to sort of fill it in and show people, the evidence of what I've been speaking about. So that was received real well. And then, but we never really had a chance to talk about this COVID pandemic. And I think both of us kind of thought that would be interesting as well. So here we are. So I'm really grateful that you've taken some more time to speak with me about that.
Yeah, it's, I've written probably 200 pages on it. I actually was hoping to read it all before this, but I didn't get to it. But I did get back to the very beginnings. I kind of wanted to figure out where my head was at for the first calendar year anyways. And I pretty much got through that. And by the end of the first calendar year, it was pretty clear it was screwed up. So.
Indeed. Well, I had some observations during the pandemic that were a little bit different. One of my favorite comedians is Stephen Wright. And Stephen Wright does a joke about how a woman notices that his socks are a different color.
She said, "You're wearing 2 different color socks." I said, "Yes, but to me they're the same because I go by thickness."
And he says, "Yeah, but I go by thickness." And that's kind of how I work is, I kind of play by a different set of rules and measure things differently. And so early on in the pandemic, I was looking at things that maybe other people weren't necessarily looking at because I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a virologist, but my background allowed me to see certain things. And as we talked about last time, the Las Vegas shooting thing was my first foray into these cover-ups. I was not a conspiracy theory guy. But as I was researching that and discovered all those strange aspects of that story, this COVID thing arrives. And it wasn't until my broadcast partner, I do a podcast every Friday night with Jason Goodman on Crowdsource the Truth. And we had been digging into the Las Vegas shooting every week, every Friday. And then when COVID hit, he said to me, there's something about this that's given me the heebie-jeebies, my spidey sense. He's like, something's weird about this. I'm not buying this whole bat soup, wet market, a bat. He's like, something's weird. So he said, take a look at it. Well, it turns out that 30-something years ago when I was at Oracle, one of the first projects I worked on was with a company called ESRI. And it was putting this mapping system together. So, I'm a young guy at Oracle. We meet with this team at ESRI, and they said, we want to be able to map data. And at the time, It was such a new concept. We couldn't understand what the hell they were talking about. It took us half an hour for it to kind of sink in. And the system that you see in front of you right now, this map, the first slide in that deck, that's the system. So 30-something years ago, the team that I brought out to, I think it was Redlands, California. It's either Redlands or Uplands or something like that. This is the system that we ended up building, is this system called Arc Info. And when I saw that Johns Hopkins was using the system to map the pandemic, I said, whoa, this is interesting. This is like one of my first cars. And they're using it. Well, I know where I hid the key. I mean, I know how to use this thing. So let's jump to the second slide in that deck that I sent you. And I'll tell you what triggered my my cognitive dissonance very early. The map that you're looking at here is from the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. Okay. One of the first things you notice about this, when you look at this map, this is from March 13th, 2020. This was the day that President Trump declared a national emergency in the United States, all 50 states. So what do you notice about the map? When, first impression, if people were listening to us on a podcast and not watching, so they can't see it, how would you describe it to somebody who's listening in their car right now?
Well, I'm guessing underneath the blotches in China is probably Wuhan, and then it's sparse until you end up over in Europe. And in particular, I'm going to insert my own personal bias on this one. I actually have an email very early in the pandemic, January, February, something like that, about how it's showing this odd tendency to show up in, I think it was Italy. And it was tracking into Italy more than anywhere else, which I think some of the explanation came down to saying, well, that's where there's a huge Wuhan to Italy, transition going on through the, airfare, and therefore.
Yeah, sure.
But I, in the email, I said it's not showing what I would expect out of a highly virulent pandemic. Well, it's tracking somehow. Yeah.
Well, my goal is to show you evidence that you haven't seen before, and that the audience, your audience, hasn't seen before, to sort of suggest that maybe there's a whole lot more to the story than anybody has considered so far. Because if all we do is talk about stuff that everybody knows already, it's kind of boring. So for me, it's exciting to show you stuff that maybe you've never seen before. So when you look at this map, the other thing that jumps out at me is it sure is pretty red. Not a whole lot of yellow or green on this map. Not a whole lot of.
Are there other colors in that coding?
Well, no.
No.
Right.
Are they supposed to show other colors though?
Well, if you're in
it's
my
all
business,
red. It's pure red.
Right.
It's
so if you're
red.
in my business and you're one of the guys who built this thing, the first thing you look at it, you say, so everywhere is terrible.
Right.
Why is everywhere? So there's no place that's yellow and there's no place that's green. Why is everything terrible? That's the first thing.
When I talk about climate change, I warn people, when you look at a map, beware of red, because anyone can make any map look bright red.
Well, this just took the Dave Collum's theory of red to 11. You can't make a map more red than this.
Right.
Where's the yellow? There's no yellow. There's no green.
So how many cases total? So there's 5,000 total deaths worldwide. Is that what the map is? Total confirmed.
That's it. Now you ready? You ready for the gut punch?
Oh, there's Italy. There's Italy right there. Yeah. I just saw it. It's number 2. Right. It's number 2. There it is.
Here comes the gut punch. The President of the United States just declared a national emergency. They're about to put the jets away in storage, right? They're going to go park the jets out in some place out in California. They got some place in the deserts in California. They park all the jets. They're about to put them all away. They're about to build field hospitals. He's declaring a national emergency because of this global pandemic. And I'm looking at the map, and it's very, very red, and the circles are the disaster. Well, how many people are dead in Hong Kong?
I can't tell. You tell me.
It's not so easy to see, is it?
None.
It's sort of obfuscated. Less than 10. How many people are dead in Shanghai? Less than 10.
Yes.
Less than
Yes.
10.
In fact, I even mentioned that early on where I said, look, it's not moving around China. It didn't make sense. So this
Yes.
that would be consistent. That would be consistent.
Yes. So hang on. It didn't just not move around China. It didn't move around China for like a year and a half. China was able to maintain less than 10,000 dead, according to the WHO and according to Johns Hopkins, for well over a year. And it makes
Didn't they end up sort of plateauing at about 85,000?
Right now it's 120,000. So right now, China has fewer dead than Peru, but we'll get to that. I don't want to jump ahead too far too fast. This was the first thing that was jumping out at me. I'm looking at this and saying, wait a second, this is Johns Hopkins. This is the Michael Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins is putting out this map, and it's telling me the status of this pandemic. And I'm saying, but there's not 10 people dead in Shanghai. There's not 10 people dead in Beijing. There's not 10 people dead in Hong Kong. And if you look real closely, there's nobody dead in Vietnam, and Vietnam shares a border with China. And there's nobody dead in Laos, and Laos shares a border with China. And I'm wondering, why would somebody make a map this red if there's not 10 people dead in Hong Kong, Beijing, or Shanghai? And how do you...
Scare the shit out of you.
Right. And why would you declare a global pandemic, Dr. Tedros, if we're not yet at 10 dead in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, Chongqing, Guangzhou? There's no city in China with more than 50 dead other than Wuhan.
And they changed the definition of pandemic to fit this numerical description.
Or it's worse and darker than that. So the net here is, this is absurd at its face. Now that you know the data that's behind this, and so wait a second, so nobody's dead in Vietnam, nobody's dead in Laos, but they've got red dots on them. I think there's one guy dead in Thailand, and there's no one dead there. So if there's
the other thing about this Hopkins data, is that it didn't come out of their med school.
School of Public Health.
I thought it came out of the math department.
But it's published by the School of Public Health. I start digging into who the hell built this thing, who was behind this, and it turns out we learned who that was. Let's jump ahead to the next slide. So now that's like one set of truth-isms, truth bombs. Shanghai, Beijing, Hong Kong don't have 10 dead. I'm having a hard time understanding why Anderson Cooper doesn't think that's interesting or relevant.
This past Friday, a long-anticipated and much-debated report by the World Health Organization was delayed again. It was supposed to be a kind of post-mortem on a trip to China by a WHO-led team of international scientists, which took place earlier this year. The question: how did SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, originate? Jamie Metzel, former NSC official in the Clinton administration and member of a WHO advisory committee on genetic engineering, is one of more than 24 experts, including virologists, who signed an open letter earlier this month calling for a new international inquiry with a return to China.
I wouldn't really call what's happened now an investigation. It's essentially a highly chaperoned, highly curated study tour.
Study tour?
Study tour. Everybody around the world is imagining this is some kind of full investigation. It's not. This group of experts only saw what the Chinese government wanted them to see.
Workers face a huge challenge trying to contain this season's flu outbreak. It is the most widespread in recent years, with at least 37 child deaths reported so far. The biggest clusters are in the South and West. Dr. Anthony Fauci is director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He's part of the effort to fight future outbreaks. He joins us from the headquarters of the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Dr. Fauci, good morning. Always good to see you.
Good morning.
First, let me ask you this. Why is this year's virus so deadly?
Individuals with underlying conditions, as well as children from birth to 4 years old, and also As we know, the vaccine this year, although it's always best to get vaccinated, is not the perfect vaccine. It is not, as we would say, favorably efficacious in the sense that we only don't know right now what the efficaciousness is going to be, but it likely is not going to be much more than around 30%. I say that with some trepidation because I don't want people not to get vaccinated. Every type of protection against the virus with a vaccine is better than no protection at all. So a combination of a vaccine that doesn't work very well and a really bad virus.
So given that combination, Dr. Fauci, what should people do?
Well, the first thing you should do, and again, getting back to vaccination, if you have not been vaccinated, you should get vaccinated. That's for sure. Then if, in fact, you do get infected, if you have what looks like it's going to be a serious infection, don't hesitate to get to a healthcare provider who can get you an anti-influenza antiviral like Tamiflu. This is particularly true for people who fall into the risk categories where complications are common. So if you're an elderly person or you have an underlying disease, you should not wait to get anti-flu medication.
You know, one of the interesting things in reading about everything that you write about, Dr. Fauci, is it's been 100 years since that lethal 1918 flu. And you're saying there could be one virus that could be catastrophic.
How does Sean Hannity not say, well, we're still not at 10 dead in Shanghai, Beijing, or Hong Kong, so it appears to be contained to Wuhan? Remember when we used to have news and they would report on things and they'd go there and it'd be like, well, CNN reporting from Shanghai where we don't yet have 10 dead. What happened to that, Dave? That's how it used to work. All right, let's go to the next slide. Let
me tell you how you dismiss that. Not to say it's true, but this is, I can remember where my head was at. And one of the things that I decided was I did not believe the data from that region of the world.
And that's a common response that I was getting early on is China is lying.
Right.
But that's a paradox, because if China's lying, how did we just declare a pandemic based on what happened, in Italy, in Bergamo?
Concern is growing this morning over an outbreak of a new SARS-like virus in China. At least 6 people have died from the Wuhan coronavirus. The Wuhan coronavirus. The Wuhan coronavirus.
The 34-year-old ophthalmologist diagnosed Saturday with the Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan virus.
The Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus. What more can you tell us about the similarities or differences between SARS and the Wuhan coronavirus?
The Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus in China.
The Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus. From the Wuhan coronavirus.
Wuhan coronavirus.
Fears continue to grow over the outbreak of the Wuhan coronavirus.
Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus.
The Wuhan coronavirus.
We have new information about how the Wuhan coronavirus is spread.
The first U.S. case of Chinese coronavirus.
The Chinese coronavirus.
This is coming as the Chinese coronavirus.
China's coronavirus outbreak.
China's coronavirus.
Outbreak anxiety. The death toll nearly doubles in China's coronavirus outbreak. China's coronavirus.
Just how bad is China's coronavirus crisis?
China's coronavirus outbreak.
China's coronavirus outbreak.
China's coronavirus outbreak.
China's coronavirus.
China's coronavirus. China's coronavirus.
China's coronavirus.
Concerns about the China coronavirus.
It's going to come across to a lot of Americans as smacking of xenophobia.
Was that the reason we declared a global pandemic because of what we saw in Bergamo? And
well, let me tell you, we talked about, might have been before we started recording, but for me, I don't like talking about things that everyone else is talking about either, right? I like to find the story beneath the story, the Michael Lewis approach.
Right.
And what I noticed early on was the films coming out of China all looked fake to me. So the spraying the streets, the people being welded in their apartments, people falling over dead in the middle of the street, throwing people in the back of a van who are fighting like crazy not to be thrown in the back of the van, and spritzing stacks of currency with little spritzer bottles, and I go, this is not helping a pandemic.
You nailed it.
And this is, and then actually what I wrote was in theory this is to get the Chinese people to behave, but that's never been a problem. This is for us.
That's right.
This
You
is
got
for
it.
us.
You nailed
yes.
it. Very insightful. It took me probably a year to realize the degree of the Chinese propaganda to help
Right.
this along. It turns out that it's what appears to be sort of the primary motive behind all this. The Chinese would have been very much on board with that primary motive. They would have been, anything we can do to help, let us know. You want videos of people keeling over in the streets and just doing a fake?
Right.
We'll make those for you.
Right.
We can do that. We can do that.
现在早上我是看到整个武汉市都公交车、地铁全部封城了。
当前要继续集中力量抓好湖北省，尤其是武汉市疫情防控。
害怕，说不害怕是假的。
然后一量那个体温37.5，我说完蛋了。
不要以为武汉人都犯病了，
生命太脆弱。
我来了，我一定要活着出去。
这两天，来自上海、浙江、海南、江西的医疗队先后出发。
我觉得我的城市并没有停下来，只是它的脚步很慢而已。
那如果我们不去的话，谁去呢？
只要希望不在，那么之前的所有这些都不会死。
And I think that's what I think that's what they did. I think they cooperated here, and I'll explain why. But first, I want to show you the data, because it's these data elements that these are new, milestones in the story. The fact that Shanghai didn't have 10 dead for how long, and today, Shanghai, according to Johns Hopkins, doesn't have 1,000 dead. Beijing doesn't have 50 dead. Okay, so if that's true, how is it not news? And if it's not true, and Johns Hopkins is publishing lousy data from China, why isn't, Leslie Stahl from CBS, 60 Minutes, whatever, why aren't they up there at Johns Hopkins saying, hey, according to you, Beijing doesn't have 50 dead. Why are you publishing this lousy data? Where is that journalism? It seems nobody's interested. Nobody thinks it's relevant that Beijing doesn't have 50 dead, that Shanghai doesn't have 1,000 dead. That's not important. Okay, we'll move on.
And jumping way ahead, though, let me just insert something here. So as soon as we locked down, China seemed to unlock down.
Yeah, they were
which
done.
Struck me as very odd.
Yeah, they were finished.
Because their work was done. And then last year, they locked down hard, supposedly, their most important industrial province. And you find out it's because they called it their zero COVID tolerance policy, which you go, I'm just not convinced China cares about a handful of dead people. I think it's got a lot of people. That's not a valued resource. And you find out that 4 people had died.
There you go.
That was the backstop. And you go, China did not lock down for 4 dead people. Same story.
You got it. You latched onto that part very early. I got fooled by that early, and it took me about a year to figure out the degree of that propaganda. So you're on target. Now let me show you the data to support that aspect of what you saw. So this next slide that we're going to look at here, I'm going to give you the bottom line up front, so that I'm not teasing you for the next hour of the conversation as to what the hell happened here. So
thank you.
All right.
Thank
so
you.
It's sort of one of the things that they do, I think, at West Point, is bottom line up front, and then show us how did you bake the cake? How did you do this? How did you get here? The net of it is that there were 2 pandemics.
Mm-hmm.
One of the pandemics was what I call the blue pandemic, and the other was the green pandemic. What you're seeing here is the 2 pandemics overlaid. The green one is COVID. The blue one is rather difficult to see because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're going to do is take a look and understand, wait a minute, how were there two pandemics? Why would there be two pandemics? Why would they only tell us about one?
And they correlate pretty rigorously.
Yes, they do, don't they? Now, yes. And we're going to look at, well, how do they correlate so rigorously? And what other phenomenon were taking place at the same time that also nobody seemed to notice and nobody reported on? So again, I couldn't understand if there's not 10 people dead in Shanghai, Beijing, or Shanghai for a year. This isn't news. This isn't, again, to me, the story then would be that Johns Hopkins doesn't count, or Johns Hopkins has got some sort of lousy data feed from China if China's lying. It's one or the other. It's, it's sort of a, it's A or B. All right. So what's with the green and the blue? Let's jump to the next slide, which is just the blue. All right, now you're looking at 10 years of data. It's all blue. Should be on slide number 4 right now. You see that one?
Got it.
All right.
Got it.
What I started to do when I realized something was weird was I said, I need to give myself a crash course in virology. I need to learn about all the viruses and in particular respiratory stuff. I want to learn about tuberculosis and how many people does it kill. I want to learn about influenza and how many people does it kill. And, and stuff that's not respiratory, norovirus, how many people's norovirus kill. And so I started to dig into all that stuff to baseline. How many people die from viruses? Is 5,000 a lot? I'm looking at Wuhan, right? And
well, flu's about 40,000 a year in the U.S. So
all right. So I'm going to come back to that because it turns out that has been a scam. The whole way? For at least 10 years. So since the 2009, since 2009 H1N1, this whole influenza thing has been a racket. And we just studied just this past week a conversation that Dr. Bob Malone had with J.J. Couey and Bobby Kennedy Jr., where they were exploring what they call the influenza vaccine industrial complex, which is how the military needs this ability to maintain vaccine manufacturing capability. And that's really what drives the whole influenza vaccine industry, is our countermeasure need to have warm manufacturing capability back when we made it in eggs, back when we did the stuff in eggs. Now that we have mRNA, it changes everything. So that's just sort of some background. So I start digging in and I look at influenza. And what you just said is what they want everybody to believe, that every season, 20, 40, 50, 60,000 people die from the flu in the United States. That's the PR campaign. We're going to break that down in a few minutes. What I'm digging into now, what you're looking at, this blue chart, this multi-year blue chart, this is 10 years of data of something they call PNI, pneumonia and influenza. They started tracking the two together after the 2009 H1N1 outbreak. They said, the truth is people are dying from pneumonia that's caused by the influenza. And so they started to lump the two together.
You can think of flu in 1918 and otherwise like that garbage can or like a shot to the ribs. It lands you on your back for a few weeks. It creates inflammation, fluid buildup in your lungs where you need them clear for oxygen, for gas exchange. And pneumonia is really, really deadly. It always has been, and it still is. And that's what killed people in 1918.
As far as the death certificates and death codes and all that, and this is how they track it. So what you see is there's a certain seasonality to it. It's got a certain waveform, wave shape to it. It peaks at a certain point and then it subsides. But then in 2020, it went to the moon. And this is PNI deaths. This is not COVID deaths. We're going to look at COVID deaths in a minute.
Is that when did they start grouping them?
They a while later, they put them into the same system and started calling it PIC, which is more, conflation, why would you do that? Why do you want to put in the same thing? We already have a discrete system for tracking influenza. You don't need to cloud it with your COVID crap, but they did. So in the early days, I had to get the data from 2 different systems and line it up. Then they put them in. But it was at least 6 months, 9 months or so. So what you see here is this massive outbreak of influenza pneumonia on the right-hand side. Well, what the hell was that? That's not COVID. Well, let's go to the next slide. The next slide, we're looking at just a shorter period of time. And what you see is, again, a massive outbreak of P&I. But the first peak, so you should be looking now at a slide that's showing, looks like about 5 years of data. It's another blue chart, right? Is that the one you see right now?
Yep.
Okay. It should be like slide number 5. Back in 2017, 2018, Dr. Fauci told us that 80,000 people died. Well, that's the peak all the way on the left. Well, if that's 80,000 people, what are these things off to the right?
A lot.
A lot more than 80,000. He told us, and you'll see it in a PBS interview, he says back in 2017, 2018, 80,000 people died from the flu.
And that was considered a bad year. That was considered a bad year, as I recall.
Terrible.
I'm just citing, I was citing the news. This is
correct. Correct. And it was.
Way, 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 way up.
Days like that are what keep Dr. Anthony Fauci up at night.
In 2017-18, we had the worst seasonal flu that we've had in memory, about 80,000 deaths and almost 1 million hospitalizations. You do that every year for 20, 30, 40 years.
That's a huge toll.
At the end of that time, that's a huge toll. About 80,000 deaths.
Never opened myself this way. Life is ours, we live it our way.
And let's go back one slide. Go back to the 10-year version. Back up one, and you'll see that
there
peak,
it is, right there.
Right,
Yeah,
it's in the middle. Right, it's right in the middle. And you see it stands out. It's worse than any of the other peaks. Looks like there was a similarly bad peak a few years prior to that. But compared to all the peaks on the left-hand side, it was the worst season. He tells us 80,000 died. The problem is that's not what the data shows.
So if you integrate under that curve, you don't get 80,000?
No, and I'm going to show you the math, and you're going to say, whoa, 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 something's up here, and I'll show you. I'm going to show it to you. But the first thing is, if that's 80,000 there in the middle, what the hell are these off to the right? That's got to be well over 100,000 people dying. What is that?
Yeah, I'd round number, guess 150, right?
All right, so let's keep going. So now we have the 5-year one. And then we get to a slide that says, what is the number one comorbidity?
Can I tell you another way they jiggered the data for us that might be inconsequential, but I noticed they started reporting data. I thought you were going to go there, where they'd show the data of deaths and cases. And then all of a sudden they started grouping it into 2-day chunks. Out of the blue, and then they converted to 3-day chunks. And what it did is it had the effect of first doubling and then tripling the height of the peaks.
Yes.
And so an untrained eye would look and say, oh my God, look how bad it's getting. And a trained eye would say, you just fucked up the curve.
Yeah, why you
that's a chart crime right there. That's unbelievably bad.
There's a lot of this. There's a lot of it.
That's when I knew they were jiggering the numbers profoundly. Again, it's been 3 years, so I don't know when I knew there was something wrong with the story by February.
Okay. I didn't
but the
until
epiphanies
March.
The epiphanies were coming in these small little wake-up call moments, and then and then by the end of 2020, it's like, holy shit, it's a complete game over story.
Yeah.
By the end of 2020, I had it completely. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt you. This is driving me nuts here.
All right, so let's go to the number one comorbidity. a lot of people think the number one comorbidity is obesity or diabetes or something like that.
It's age.
But it's not. That's true. Yes. So yeah, being older than 65 was clearly the number one. Turns out that the number one comorbidity is influenza and pneumonia. Well, so if half of the people who died with COVID also had influenza and pneumonia, that's 500,000 people, Dave. There's 520,000 people whose death certificates say COVID-19 and influenza and pneumonia.
500,000 worldwide, or
in the USA
nationally?
alone. So
in the USA alone.
So of the 1.2 million,
right,
520 something thousand say influenza, pneumonia, and COVID-19.
Well, I also thought they also at some point started claiming there was no flu at all.
That's what Dr. Fauci. Let me play it for you. All right, I have it.
And then they claim that it's some viral competition and the flu gets outcompeted by COVID. And you go, well, excuse me, dude. But if they're not getting the flu because they're locked down, how the hell are they getting COVID?
Well, let me play a clip for you. Dr. Fauci does an interview with Brett Baer. And
I remember this vividly.
And Brett Baer says to him, so what the hell happened to the flu? And you're going to hear Dr. Fauci spin up a story here, but but you're looking at the data. So the table that I have up in front of you, right, says comorbidities and other conditions. You see that? Number one, influenza and pneumonia with a bullet, 500 and something thousand people. It's now 520. Now, if you look up top in the paragraph, the part that I highlighted in light blue, it says that for about 5% of the people that died, COVID-19 is the only thing on the death certificate.
Which was like 10,000 people total.
Well, that's
it was a ridiculously low number.
Right now, with 1.2 million, that's 60,000 people. So what they're saying is 60,000 people died, and the death certificate just says COVID. It doesn't say ARDS. It doesn't have COPD. They didn't have kidney cancer. Now, maybe that's undercounting. Maybe the real number is closer to 100,000, 120,000, which would be on par with India. India has half as many dead as the United States.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen? How does India, with 4.5 times our population, have half as many dead? Maybe we overcounted.
They don't have TV.
Right.
They don't have TV.
Right. They didn't overcount.
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality. There are other countries that if you had a pre-existing condition, and let's say the virus caused you to go to the ICU and then have a heart or kidney problem, some countries are recording that as a heart issue or a kidney issue and not a COVID-19 death. Right now, we're still recording it, and the great thing about having forms that come in and a form that has the ability to mark it as COVID-19 infection, the intent is right now that if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death.
Can you be sure? I mean, you hear from coroners that that's not necessarily the case. Or are you sure? How can you be confident about that? And is there any concern that it skews?
All right, let me play this clip because this is Brett Baer and Dr. Fauci. And the irony here is you're looking at the comorbidity report from the CDC that tells you 500,000 people, it says influenza on their death certificate. These are dead people. Listen to what Fauci says.
Yeah. And, because of what we're doing with coronavirus, we haven't heard a lot about the seasonal flu. We lose 30 to 60,000 people from the flu. Has that gone down dramatically?
Extraordinarily dramatically, Brett. And in fact, that is a very good testimony to the efficacy of wearing masks, avoiding congregate settings, and keeping distance, because we did that during this late fall, early winter. And the level of influenza in the community is remarkably low regarding comparisons to other years. Our Australian colleagues had the same experience during their winter, which is essentially our summer. When I was talking to my colleagues in Australia, they were saying, Tony, we don't have hardly any flu this year, and we think it's due to the fact that people are wearing masks, keeping their distance, and avoiding congregate settings. Goes to show you that those types of public health measures actually work.
Dr. Fauci, we appreciate your time. You're welcome back anytime.
So Tony Fauci's talking about Australia, and he says that influenza disappeared in Australia. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at Australia and see, well, how did influenza disappear in Australia? Because if half the people here are dead, they've got influenza on the death certificate and COVID, maybe that's why those two curves look so much alike. So we were just looking at these comorbidities that, according to the CDC, almost half of the COVID deaths also have this coronavirus and influenza at the same time. And that struck me as a bit odd. Now, Dr. Fauci, we just heard with Brett Baer, says, no. Influenza disappeared. All that masking, hand washing, and social distancing in the first year remarkably eradicated influenza. Well, that's a little weird. Let's jump ahead to the next slide where we just, we were looking at those mountain charts, the blue and the green that are overlaid. Right? COVID comes on real strong. COVID is the green virus, right? So COVID comes on real hard, real strong at almost exactly the same time that this P&I thing appeared to come on real strong. And if you go to the next slide where you see it in the perspective of the 10-year view, it's almost as if there was a P&I pandemic that Dr. Fauci needed to hide. It's almost like
there is a P&I pandemic,
right?
If the data is valid, right?
Right. So, sort of the working theory that I came up with here was that Dr. Fauci couldn't hide this P&I pandemic without a scapegoat pandemic. He needed another virus to blame this on because, and we'll figure out why would that be. Why would you not tell everybody there's an influenza outbreak? Why would you keep that a secret? That kept driving me crazy. Why would you not tell people there's two viruses? There's chickenpox and the mumps.
Let me just interject that if you're trying to sell vaccines and mRNA, then you sure as hell would conceal all that. Just the obvious answer.
All right, so let's put that on the shelf as a potential scenario, right? Each one of these are potential scenarios. We go to the next slide where we'll see the two side by side. You'll see the blue mountain chart on the right, and then the blue mountain chart with the green overlaid on the left.
Yeah, they're the same chart essentially, right?
All right, but if you look closely in the valleys on the left side, COVID is not more than P&I in the valleys.
Right.
In the valleys, in fact, for the last year, believe it or not, influenza P&I has been more than COVID deaths in the United States, and they count everything. George Floyd was a COVID death. Right? George Floyd.
Besides overdosing on drugs.
But he counted as a COVID. He tested positive for COVID.
I know.
And that's how we count. That's how we count. So he counted as a COVID death.
Oh, yeah, they called people who all sorts of, they called everything COVID. Part of the problem was they had debilitated the hospital so badly, and they were told, look, just check the damn box. You'll get a ton of money. Check the damn box. And by the way, people don't know how much they got. If you tested positive, the hospital got 13,000. Check the damn box. Send it through 40 cycles of the PCR. Get the thing positive. Second of all, I think the numbers went as high as if you ended up in the ICU, you ended up getting almost $500,000.
Well,
they were bailing out. They were paying the hospitals to handle just COVID, making sure they got plenty of money.
No doubt about it. I mean, clearly incentives drive behavior. We know that. Yep. Dr. Scott Jensen comes out from Minnesota and says, we were just told it's $13,000 if we admit a COVID patient. And if we intubate them, if we put them on a ventilator, it's $39,000 reimbursement. And then if our facility, if this hospital operation that we have here admits more than 100 patients by, I think it was June the 10th or something like that of 2020, he said we get another $77,000 per patient. It's $116,000 a patient, like bonus money.
When we found out last week that the changes in reporting COVID-19 cases in hospitals and ICUs were being done by the Minnesota Department of Health, you put out your Facebook video. We were able to show some of that. Your first reaction when you heard this was what?
If we are trying to be transparent, if we are trying to include Minnesotans in the conversation, why does the Department of Health do this?
We're going to have a special guest in here in just a second, Dr. Scott Jensen. I saw his thread yesterday, his video, and I thought, oh my God, I must interview him. There's a lot to get into here. There you are, Dr. Jensen. Well, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So tell me, for people that haven't seen your video that I caught yesterday and immediately reached out to you, to tell people what the content of that video was and what prompted you to do that.
Well, about 10 days ago, I received a letter from the Minnesota Board of Medical Practice identifying that they were investigating me for public comments regarding COVID-19, and they listed 2 allegations. The first one was that I was spreading misinformation when I appeared on April 7th on a Fargo Moorhead news program with Chris Berg. And that night, I guess it was perhaps one of the first times that anybody had talked about publicly the appropriate completion of a death certificate. And I made the comment that I felt the Department of Health in Minnesota had conveyed information that was misleading and ambiguous and really counter to what I've spent the last 35 years doing. So in the process of that discussion, someone evidently thought that was spreading misinformation. And the second allegation was very nebulous, and it simply said that I was guilty of providing reckless advice because I compared COVID-19 to influenza outbreaks.
To intubate them and to get to 100 patients. And if incentives drive behavior, that's clearly a yellow flag. That's got to be something that we all say, well, that's...
And there's all those videos of the nurses talking about patients getting intubated who didn't need it.
This is Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel, ER and critical care doctor from New York City. 9 days ago, I opened an intensive care unit to care for the sickest COVID-positive patients in this city. In these 9 days, I have seen things I have never seen before. In treating these patients, I have witnessed medical phenomenon that just don't make sense in the context of treating a disease that is supposed to be a viral pneumonia. 9 days ago, I presumed I was opening an intensive care unit to treat patients with a virus causing a pneumonia that was ravaging lungs across the world, starting out as something mild, cough, a sore throat, and progressively increasing in severity until ultimately ending in something called acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. This is the paradigm that every hospital in the country is working under. This is the disease, ARDS, that every hospital is preparing to treat. And this is the disease, ARDS, for which in the next 2 to 6 weeks, 100,000 Americans might be put on a ventilator. And yet, everything I've seen in the last 9 days, all the things that just don't make sense, the patients I'm seeing in front of me, the lungs I'm trying to improve, have led me to believe that COVID-19 is not this disease, and that we are operating under a medical paradigm that is untrue. In short, I believe we are treating the wrong disease, and I fear that this misguided treatment will lead to a tremendous amount of harm to a great number of people in a very short time. As New York City appears to be about 10 days ahead of the country, I feel compelled to get this information out. COVID-19 lung disease, as far as I can see, is not a pneumonia and should not be treated as one. Rather, it appears as some kind of viral-induced disease, most resembling high-altitude sickness. It is as if tens of thousands of my fellow New Yorkers are on a plane at 30,000 feet and the cabin pressure is slowly being let out. These patients are slowly being starved of oxygen. I have seen patients dependent on oxygen take off their oxygen and quickly progress through a state of anxiety and emotional distress and eventually get blue in the face. And while they look like patients absolutely on the brink of death, they do not look like patients dying of pneumonia. I have never been a mountain climber, and I do not know the conditions at base camp below the highest peaks in the world. But I suspect that the patients I'm seeing in front of me look most like as if a person was dropped off on the top of Mount Everest without time to acclimate. I don't know the final answer of this disease, but I'm quite sure that a ventilator is not it. That is not to say that we don't need ventilators. We absolutely need them. They are the only way at this time that we're able to give a little more oxygen to patients who need it. But when we treat people with ARDS, we typically use ventilators to treat what's called respiratory failure. That is, we use the ventilator to do the work that the patient's muscles can no longer do because they're too tired to do it. These patients' muscles work fine. I fear that if we're using a false paradigm to treat a new disease, that the method that we program the ventilator, one based on a notion of respiratory failure as opposed to oxygen failure, that this method, and there are a great many number of methods we can use with the ventilator, but this method being widely adopted at this very moment in every hospital in the country, which aims to increase pressure on the lungs in order to open them up, is actually doing more harm than good. And that the pressure we are providing to lungs, we may be providing to lungs that cannot stand it, that cannot take it, and that the ARDS that we are seeing, that the whole world is seeing, may be nothing more than lung injury caused by the ventilator. I'm confident that if those of us that work bedside with these patients, those of us who are witnessing the things that we have never seen before, despite the many years we have worked and the thousands of patients and diseases we have seen, if we can effectively communicate this to all those that are so important but who are not bedside, the researchers, the administrators, those who procure our resources and make our protocols, the politicians, our own governments, if we are able to convince them that this is a disease that is different than anything we have ever seen, that this is a disease that is different than anything we have ever seen, that this is a disease that is different than anything we have ever seen.
Yes. Yeah. No, there's more to that story too. Let's go back to the data. I want you to go ahead to the next slide where I think it's slide number 11, where you're going to see a lot of blue and then the onset of the green.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You with me on that one?
Yeah, I got it.
All right. That is January, February, and March of 2020. The blue are P&I deaths. The green are all deaths with COVID, including motorcycle accidents, car crashes,
Right.
burn victims.
And those are weak numbers along the bottom.
Correct.
Right?
Those are the weak numbers, right? Week
so
1,
you're
week 2,
4
week
months
3.
in, 4 months in, right?
All right. So now the thing that got my attention, because this is my background, this is my career, was doing dashboards for CIOs and stuff like that. The trigger that this tripped for me, there's more than 4,000 people dying every week from P&I.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
10,000. There's 10,000.
Well, up at the right, but I'm saying each week, week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4, that's 4,000 people each week. If you go back to the 2009 swine flu pandemic, the H1N1, I don't know why they called it swine flu, but the H1N1 pandemic from 2009, which we now call PDM09, only 12,000 people died in the U.S. So if 12,000 people died back then from a pandemic, you've got 12,000 people dead in 3 weeks here. How are you guys not losing your minds over this?
It's steady too. It's
steady, and then look what happens.
Take a look. You see all that red? I mean, how could you not? That should be a red flag about just how bad this year's flu season has gotten. The CDC says influenza is widespread in all but 2 states and Washington, D.C. It's that map, that rampant spreading virus we should be worried about. But in the last week, most of what we hear about when it comes to health news is the coronavirus.
There's growing concern about the coronavirus tonight.
As the coronavirus outbreak grows rapidly in China.
This is the epicenter of the virus outbreak.
Like in previous outbreaks of coronavirus.
Screenings for coronavirus are underway at Minneapolis-St. Paul International.
So once you sift through all of that coverage and just take a deep breath, let's bring the focus back to where health officials here say it should be, the flu.
So close, no matter how far. Couldn't be much more from the heart. Forever trust who we are.
Concerns over the flu. The first day of winter is still a few weeks away, but the start of flu season appears to be here, with between 1.7 and 2.5 million flu-related illnesses already reported. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, forecasts suggest that flu activity will continue to rise. There's a 40% chance it will now peak in December, which the CDC notes would be considered early compared to previous years.
You know, on an average year, 125 to 200 people a day die of the flu. So this is preventable, most of these deaths, with the vaccine, even though the vaccine hasn't been great the last couple of years.
Give DJ.
We are definitely seeing a higher number of flu cases this year than versus last year.
And as it starts to get worse, you've got a white knight, a green knight, a virus from Wuhan that comes along to steal your thunder. On purpose? On purpose? Well, why would you not tell everybody about the blue one?
In terms of the number of people infected, flu is now widespread in almost every single state, and nearly 10 million people have become ill so far. 4,800 of those people have died.
No matter how far. Couldn't be much more from the heart. Forever trust who we are. And nothing else matters. Myself this way. Life is ours, we live it our way. All these words I don't just say, and nothing else matters.
Take a look. You see all that red? How could you not? That should be a red flag about just how bad this year's flu season has gotten. The CDC says influenza is widespread in all but 2 states and Washington, D.C. It's that map.
If you get a new kitten, it's very cute little kitten. Do you stop feeding your dog? No. You're going to let the dog starve because you got a new kitten? Just because there's a new virus in town doesn't mean that influenza just what? Let's go to the next slide. How do you hide a pandemic? Why would you hide a pandemic? We got to figure out why would you do it, and then how would you do it? How do you hide a pandemic? Well, let's go to the next slide where you'll see the green and the blue overlaid again, multiple years. That's how you hide it. You hide the blue pandemic behind the green pandemic. Okay. Now let's go to the next slide, and I'll show you where the data came from. So everything you're
we should on a blue bar chart, right? I'm on blue bar chart.
You were.
That's what
and now I want you to go to slide number 13 where there's a map. You'll see a red United States on the left and then a bunch of peaky stuff on the right.
There it is. I got it.
Okay. This is the system where I'm getting all this data from. So this is the source of the data. It's the CDC's Flu View system, right? Flu View. Is it Coxsackie View? No. Is it RSV View? No. It's Flu View.
Can I ask a question? Do you have to test positive for flu to get into this database? Or does it require simply a doctor proclaiming it?
We'd have to ask a physician that if somebody died of influenza and pneumonia, how would they mark the death certificate in the pre-COVID days? That's a really valid question. It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. But the net of it is that this system has been in place for years. They've been tracking this stuff for years. And so this is where I got the baseline. So I get the baseline of all the P&I deaths from this. And this is counting. This is mortality, pneumonia and influenza mortality surveillance from the National Center for Health Statistics Mortality Surveillance System. This is the death certificate counting system for P&I. Well, eventually they add COVID to it. But if you look at the top where I've got the green arrow, You have the ability to turn the COVID on or off. So when you turn off all deaths with COVID, we're left with who died from P&I the old-fashioned way, the way we used to count before COVID showed up. And that's what those radio buttons are at the top. So I say, go here to get the P&I data with no I don't want the COVID deaths. I'm not interested in that. I know you counted everybody. I get it. Everybody who died with COVID. I got it. 1.2 million people. You know how many people? You know how many people died in Bangladesh? Bangladesh is like 168 million people in Bangladesh. I think they've got 7 toilets, and there's not 35,000 people dead.
And Uttar Pradesh, the famous Uttar Pradesh.
There's Pakistan. Pakistan has fewer people dead than Ohio. Pakistan's got 220 million people.
Well, the party line was that place is so full of chaos that they don't count shit. That's the party line. I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay. Well, then, then none of the data matters, right? So if China's lying and Pakistan can't count, Nigeria can't count, then, what do we need data for? We probably fold.
Well, except for there is, I mentioned Uttar Pradesh, which we should clarify. Uttar Pradesh seemed to be counting and seemed to be getting hit with stuff. And then they put everybody on ivermectin. You might have to clip this out of your podcast.
Exactly. Well, and we'll look in India. We're going to look in India. But before we go to India, I want you to see, let's go to this next slide. You should see a bunch of blue bars. I think you jumped ahead to this one before. This is blue bar, blue bar, blue bar. Okay. These, all right. So this is now the annual totals of P&I deaths by season. So when we took the baseline, and we see the waveform, we see that it's seasonal, right? We see the peaks, we see the valleys. We also see that it's evergreen. We see it never really goes away.
So let me ask you quickly.
Yeah.
Do you believe this is a legitimate pandemic? I'm still trying to figure out this.
Yes. Yes.
The
blue
P&I.
one.
So you think the P&I is real?
Yes.
Did Fauci know it was coming?
Fauci told you it was coming.
There will be a surprise outbreak. There will be a surprise outbreak. The idea that we are now a few days away from a new administration, the topic today is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today, based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. Tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind there will be a surprise outbreak. There's no doubt in anyone's mind there will be a surprise outbreak.
I know, but
Fauci.
see, I think they named the swine flu after Fauci, if you really want to know.
All right, so you saw the footage of Fauci at Georgetown, right?
I know.
So Fauci predicts a surprise pandemic. Everybody thinks he's talking about SARS.
But that was 2017. That was 2017, I think he predicted that.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I would argue that tells me he knows they're going to release something.
Correct. I agree with you 100%.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure where we're at.
All right. So I think the plan was already set. So understand that when Fauci makes the prediction, it's 1 week before the inauguration of Trump. He's won the election. They didn't think that was going to happen. Hillary was supposed to win. So as soon as he wins, this is a week before, and Fauci's predicting a surprise outbreak for this incoming administration, which is kind of odd. And yet the outbreak, so then we're going to track down this outbreak, because to me it appears that the real pandemic is the blue pandemic. This is the virus that Fauci predicted. When Fauci said you were going to have a surprise outbreak, he just can't keep his mouth shut. He just can't keep his mouth shut.
And it was 2019 that Gates said that 2020 would be the year of vaccines.
Right. So what happened in 2019?
Weird moment.
So I'm going to show you what happened in 2019. that shows us that this was the problem. So what you're seeing here on the blue chart, this is annual P&I deaths. Look at the numbers. This does not foot with what you've been told.
At
the
all.
CDC is telling you 22,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, but the real numbers are like 180,000, 175,000, 200, 190,000. If you
and you're getting this off this flu view. You're getting this off the
straight from FluView. Straight from FluView. Okay. This is P&I deaths. So the thing here is, so wait a second. If these are P&I deaths, what the hell is this thing you keep calling 22,000? What is that? Well, that's something they call influenza burden. And we're going to take a look at how do they calculate influenza burden, because in the database business, we call that a derived value. It doesn't exist naturally. It's a calculated value, and we're going to look at what is influenza burden. Why did we need something called influenza burden? Is it because the P&I numbers were too high? And if America heard that 200,000 people still died of influenza, even though they had the inoculations, we'd never take them. So we need a much more palatable number like 12,000, 18,000, 22,000. Those are much more palatable. Numbers like 185,000 people died this season of influenza, even though we distributed the vaccine to 40 million people.
But couldn't they just say it would be 1 million if we didn't, and therefore?
I'm sure they would. But that's that.
This was easier.
Right. And again, this is just like footnote stuff. In other words, so wait a second. These numbers, when Dr. Fauci said 80,000 people died in the 2017-2018 season, here it says 200,000. What the hell is he talking about? And then, if that's all the case, what are these big things on the right? These are huge numbers. This got no attention. Let's continue to the next slide. The next slide, you're going to see the Blue Mountain chart, and you're going to see a tally for each one of the years up in the header. So up in the header, you can see by season, 275,000, 400 something thousand people, 300. These are huge numbers. This adds up to 1.2 million people since October 2019. That's a lot of people that died from P&I. Now, if you jump ahead to the next slide, this is where Dr. Fauci tells PBS 80,000 people died in 2017, 2018. He's on camera. His slide says it. He says it verbally. He says about 80,000 people died in this terrible season. Really bad news. Jump ahead to the next slide. That's what FluView says. The number of people who died with influenza is like 15,000. The number of people who died with pneumonia was like 180,000. How does he come up with 80?
Good question.
Well, look at the next slide, because the CDC tells you in 2019, 2020, the burden of flu. You see the slide with the Madison Square Garden in Florida?
Got it.
See in the middle, it says the burden of flu, 2019.
So I'm going to guess that's where flu was a contributor in a death. Is that right?
Well, no.
Is that
what they're saying is they're into hospitalizations, and people who died at home don't get counted. And so for hospitalists, the public doesn't care about hospitalists. We don't care about how many nights you're in bedpan usage and utilization. Nobody cares about that. We want to know how many people died of the flu.
Right.
So when they're telling you 22,000 is the burden of flu, what is that? Let's go to the next slide. The next slide is from the paper that defines influenza burden. Take a look.
So is that equation? Is that equation?
Don't you love that?
Reported deaths divided by reported hospitalizations, deaths per hospitalization, times 1/% of deaths that occur in the hospital.
Isn't that cute? This is what I call professional obfuscation. This is when you pay. This is when you pay 8 or 10 people to come up with a new factor so that nobody can figure out what the hell you're doing.
We call that a fudge factor where I come from.
Look at the pyramids. How do you have a formula that requires geometry to follow the logic here? You see the pyramids in the middle here? They've got a whole logic tree here. I challenge anybody from the CDC to take the data that we just pulled from FluView and show us how they calculated the 22,000.
But you can take that equation and turn it absurd without looking at the pyramid. And that is, if you take reported deaths over percent of deaths that occur in hospitalization, you essentially end up with a ratio that tells you deaths outside the hospital and inside.
Yeah.
Right. And then divide that by hospitalizations. That leads to nonsense, I think. I think that leads to complete nonsense.
So I do a series on my YouTube channel where I read documents like this I call bedtime stories because they're ridiculous and they're boring. And
you have a twisted personality.
So I read the whole thing. So we read it. It's absurd. It's so absurd. It's professional obfuscation. They put this together so that, go back up a slide with me. Go back to the slide from the CDC. Now they've got plausible deniability. Now they can tell you the number's 22,000. Here's how. Oh, yeah. No. That's not from FluView, Dave. That's not the actual number of people that died from FluView, Dave.
That's the massage data, right?
That's burden. It says right there, Dave. It says the burden of flu. Were you not paying attention, Dave? You're accusing us of doing something. It says the burden of flu. Are you not familiar with influenza burden? This is their plausible deniability. This is the
the funny thing is, a person who knows just English would just figure that's an adjective. Just an adjective.
Dave, nobody's figured this out. This has been going on for 10 or 12 years already. Nobody, look at this. Go back to this, the definition with the triangles and the form. This is absurd. This is absurd. Great. I'll send you the full document so you can read it when you're on the toilet. You're going to enjoy this one.
I don't know.
Jump ahead one more page. So that's how they come together. You go to, you can see the triangles. In other words, we're interested in the top of the triangle, the top of the pyramid. It says died. If you jump ahead to slide 21, the PLOS1 slide, you'll see that I blew up the triangle diagram. And
okay, reported rate, adjusted rate, hospitalization.
Extrapolate to U.S. population. Correct for under detection.
Died, hospitalized. Holy Jesus.
All I want, Dave, is the number in the top of the triangle which says died. That's the only one I want.
Right.
Just tell me how many died. I don't need all the other.
Right.
A little complicated, huh?
Yeah.
No. All right, so let's jump ahead. Let's see if we can figure this out.
Looks good for a boardroom presentation.
It's a lot of fun. All right, so we've got our 10-year baseline with this apparent P&I outbreak. Jump ahead. We've got a COVID outbreak that comes on strong out of nowhere that seems to track with that thing. Now, the next slide is a white paper that I put together tongue-in-cheek in October of 2020. This was Queen's Gambit. Don't know if you play chess.
Honorary PhD.
Yes, thank you. So, well, I'm ready to sit. I'm ready to defend my thesis. Anybody who wants to sit through all my my Las Vegas stuff, I'm ready to defend that for a PhD in criminology any day.
I'll be your honorary advisor for this.
There we go. All right. So here we go. We've got decreased influenza activity during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it turns out there was a paper from a group that documented the phenomenon in Australia, Chile, South Africa, and the United States. And I looked at their paper and I went to the system at the WHO and I said, okay, so you documented this in 4 countries. That's fabulous. And then what happened? Did you guys have a lunch date? Did you have a party at Bennigan's? Was there a TGI Friday special? Because the same phenomenon appears to have happened in 100 other countries, and you missed that part? So that's why I wrote the paper. I cited their work. They documented the first 4 countries. I documented the remaining 102. Okay. So what is the phenomenon we're looking at here? Jump ahead with me to the next page, if you would, and you'll see about 6 different countries. This is a system from the WHO. It's called GISRS FluNet. And unlike the system at the CDC, we were looking at flu deaths, influenza and pneumonia deaths, PNI deaths. This is specimens. The WHO tracks specimens of influenza that are being tested all over the world so that we can see if there's an outbreak in Nigeria, if there's an outbreak in Cambodia, we see it, right? You can see what's happening. So I go to the system because I'm a cartographer. I'm a map guy. So I want to see, show me all the other countries. I want to, don't tell me about Australia, Chile, and New Zealand. I would keep going, right? Let's spin the globe, baby. How did influenza disappear in all these countries at the same exact time?
2 friends having coffee together when something flies by their window. It might be out on that lawn, which is wide, at least half of a playing field. Because there's no explaining what your imagination can make you see and feel. Somebody needs nothing. You'll be hypnotized. Now it's not a meaningless question to ask if they've been and gone. I remember a talk about North Carolina in a strange, strange poem. See, the sides were like glass in the thick of a forest without a road. And if any man's hand ever made that land, then I think it would have showed. And that's why it seems like they got me hypnotized.
What the hell is that? How did that happen? I go to the next page. It turns out that in weeks 11 through 14, influenza disappears. All right, so 11 is mid-March.
Right.
So when Trump says national emergency, influenza disappears from Earth. So in 28 days, in a 4-week window, over 100 countries eradicate influenza for over a year. It's gone. Now, again, the paper is based on this other paper. You can flip, go to page 27, 28, you'll see their paper. So they documented it in South Africa and Chile. And what about Hungary? What about Germany? So jump with me now. I want to show the audience a whole bunch of countries. The first one I'm going to show you is Switzerland. Jump ahead till you see Switzerland.
I see a purplish chart of blue.
Next one.
There we go. Green and orange.
Switzerland,
green and
right?
brown.
Okay, upper left-hand corner says Switzerland.
Yes.
Okay. World Health Organization. Influenza laboratory surveillance from the Global Influenza Surveillance and Response System, GISRS. This is the WHO. So I'm at the World Health Organization's influenza surveillance monitoring system. And according to them, Switzerland eradicated influenza in weeks 11 and 12. It was gone. Wow.
Let me ask, are all these weeks zero?
Yes.
The ones in this chart, this thing wasn't published in May or anything like that.
No,
this is the entire year.
This is retrospective.
That's the entire year.
Oh,
that's impressive.
If you're smiling now, you're gonna.
That's funny.
All right, next country. Jump ahead with me.
Yeah, I got the pattern.
Ukraine.
Someone got the flu. Someone got the flu.
Ukraine.
48.
Look at
holy.
United Arab Emirates, Turkey, United Kingdom, United States.
UK didn't play along completely.
Okay, yeah. Now go to the United States, and then you'll see a
There, I see it.
All right, then I've got a multi-year chart of the United States, so that you get a little bit of a baseline understanding of.
Oh yeah, I've seen something like this.
Okay.
So
Go to
they
the next
just
one. 4 on
swallowed
a
it.
screen. 4 on a screen. Next one. Four to
Yeah,
a
got it.
square. You see a pattern? Do you need
Yeah.
to be a virologist? Do you need to be an epidemiologist to notice something here and say, hey, wait a second. Influenza just disappeared at the
From all the
same
countries
time?
simultaneously. Yeah.
What's the next page? We got Denmark. It's like almost 2 years. It's gone. Next one's Norway. Look how steep it falls off, too. So the fall off is dramatic. You know, I got Sweden, right? Keep going. Sweden, UK. UK is real odd. UK seems like they turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off. I don't know what the hell they're doing over there.
I'm in Sweden, UK. There's UK.
There you
Okay.
go. There you go. And then you'll
Look
get
at that. That's a step function right there. That's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah. And then I've got a page where you see over 100 countries. So
To prove you have them, yes.
Yes. And what you'll also notice, if you jump ahead to the next slide, this is pediatric influenza. So pediatric influenza in the United States appears to have disappeared as well. So
Why
it's
would
like
it all of a sudden appear briefly? What is that? One spike? What the hell is
just
that?
one?
That's one case.
One
That's
case.
one case.
Yes.
One death.
One death,
Oh,
one
wow.
pediatric death.
One
So we
death.
had 100 and something, 100 and something, 100 and something, and one.
Weren't kids back in school by then?
Not in 2020. They were out. And I've got two
whole?
pediatrics. Yeah, I got two pediatrics to look at here. And then we get back to the two pandemics, the green one and the blue one. And so the question is, well, how do you hide a blue pandemic? Well, there's two things you need. All right. So if you came to me as a magician and said, it appears that one of these viruses that we've been working on at Walter Reed may have gotten out from one of our labs somewhere, and we don't really want it traced back to Walter Reed. How do we hide that? What kind of plan could we come up with so that this pandemic we're about to experience, everybody's not going, well, that's Walter Reed's thing. That came from Jeffrey Taubenberger. How do we do that? How do we hide a pandemic? I'm going to show you how to do it. Exactly. Well, that's step one. So step one is I need a scapegoat virus that presents similarly. It presents similarly. It's a respiratory infection. It's going to.
So when you say it came out of Walter Reed, so Walter Reed is also a Fort Detrick wannabe.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Same thing. Fort Detrick and Walter Reed, they're synonymous. So, meaning U.S. AMRID, United States Military.
Got it.
Yeah. So, which strain it is specifically? How do I know? These guys are whipping up strains every week. So, but the net of it is, why would you hide an influenza pandemic? Why would you do that?
The pooch.
Right. All right. So, first thing I would do, as I said, well, I need a scapegoat virus. Who's got Peter Daszak's
By the way,
formula?
I have a number of contacts who said they got sicker than shit in 19, and that they think they got COVID in 19. That story pops up a lot.
Well,
now I'll tell you another part of that story that's really interesting. A friend of mine who reached out to me, who was I couldn't tell if he was just a whack job or not. I've gotten to know him. I spent time with him on my deck. Turns out he's Canadian military intel. And he said that the entire world military games in Wuhan in October of 2019, they all got sicker than shit, and there were no Chinese in sight. There was something so suspiciously wrong with the story. So October is at least is the latest that it started, wherever the hell it
So
started.
I believe that the Wuhan Games was the super spreader event for both viruses.
What a brilliant way to,
for both.
Well, but if the Fort Detrick / Walter Reed one was a pooch screw, if they screwed the pooch, would they fly some over to Wuhan or something?
We just looked at all that stuff from the WHO, and what we know is that in the summer of 2019, So June, July, August of 2019, Australia goes through the worst influenza season they've seen in 100 years. 4 times more people die from influenza in Queensland than had the prior year.
Flu experts are calling it the strangest season of all.
We haven't had something like this in living memory. To kick off so early is most unusual.
The problem with the word influenza is its misappropriated meaning. We get a cough or cold and then wrongly moan, we've got the flu. It's a mistake, which means we don't take the real flu seriously enough, even though last year it killed 1,100 Australians and put another 30,000 in hospital. It's a deadly danger, but there is some good news. Scientists are currently working on a super vaccine to beat the virus, one that's much more effective and longer lasting than the current yearly flu jab. In the meantime, though, as Karl Stefanovic reports, Australians need to avoid the flu like the plague.
Influenza has the potential to be very dangerous, I think, compared to some issues such as Ebola or a new strain of flu such as swine flu. People have become desensitised because it's there every year. But it is certainly a serious infection.
Notifications for influenza have skyrocketed this year, hitting almost 58,000 cases so far. That dwarfs the number of notifications normally received by this time of year. Already, 139 people have died, including a 3-year-old in Victoria and a 15-year-old girl in Adelaide.
It has been a very bad year, although technically we're still not in the flu season.
The pre-season's been dreadful, with early flu cases running up to 6 times higher than normal. We'll hit 40,000 victims later this week, almost as many as the whole of last year. There are outbreaks in aged care homes, with influenza deaths now occurring each week.
None of this bodes particularly well. We have seen a busy early season.
And an early start
may mean we see a slightly earlier peak.
Arriving now, 6 million flu jabs, more than ever, being distributed at record speed. Demand for the high-strength shot for over 65s is at an all-time high, and it's free. Children under 5 can also get a free shot.
The testing of the viruses that we've seen in people so far, they match with the vaccine we're using. So we should get good protection.
While they're already in the high-risk category, there's added incentive this year for obese people to avoid the flu. New research has found because they carry more virus, not only are they more likely to catch it, they're also more likely to spread it. Alex Hart, 7 News.
4 times more.
They also suffered the first wave of Nazi-like behavior in the history of Australia.
So here's what happens. It appears that the influenza outbreak begins in the southern hemisphere in 2019. Australia sends 100 athletes to Wuhan. Chile goes to Wuhan. South Africa. So, in other words, the countries.
Everybody goes to Wuhan.
They all go to Wuhan. 10,000 athletes. 10,000 athletes. Right. 100,000 spectators. 2 pathogens. Peter Daszak. Well, the influenza one was already out. It was already in the wild, and it does its own thing. You send 100. You send 100 sweaty athletes to Wuhan.
Just get this
everybody's going to get it.
You think they knew it was out, and therefore they shipped a shitload to Wuhan to release it simultaneously with COVID.
Vice versa, but yes. So you just put the cart in front of the horse. The influenza pandemic was already underway in August in Australia. Fauci knows Australia is going to the Wuhan Games. They're going to bring it there. Nobody has to do anything. Nobody has to lift a finger.
I see.
It's coming to Wuhan.
So he had to just release the COVID.
That's it. So he calls Daszak. Daszak's office is on 34th Street, New York City. They're like,
By the way, Daszak has blocked me on Twitter. I've never once said a word to the guy. He knows who's trash talking him.
Yeah, same with me. So he blocked me too. So you call Daszak and you say, Peter, I need you to meet me in Central Park. This is not an email conversation.
Right. Yeah.
I need a respiratory virus that presents this way. That's it. What do you got? Now, I'm going to suggest something to you that's something I've been developing. I've been having some conversations privately with Dr. Tal Braun, and he's a counterterrorism expert. And we're talking about how if you were going to manufacture, or if you were going to choose a scapegoat virus, a patsy virus, a virus that you wanted all the attention to be on, having a furin cleavage site is good. In other words, I'm hoping somebody's going to find it and go, hey, wait a second. This has got a CGG.
This came right out of the Wuhan lab. Yeah.
Guess what? I mean, I don't know if you do any fishing, but this is what I said to Dr. Braun.
I know fishing well.
All right. There's two different kinds of lures when you go fishing. There's the lures that actually look like a fish. It looks like a little baby fish. And then there's lures that
supernormal stimulus, right? The flashy,
Yeah, then there's the ones that have got the 3D holographic green and orange stuff that are designed to aggravate and attract attention, not look like another fish.
Right.
If you needed a scapegoat virus,
you need the second lure.
I want the one that's got the kitchen sink in it.
Right.
It's got GP120. It's got CGG. What doesn't this thing have in it? So in other words, I've got Dr. Braun says, wait a second, this is the same sequence as we find it. This is the GP120 sequence. This is the same thing as snake venom. This is in the HIV strain. And then I got Dr. Quay.
The snake venom story never got legs. It was interesting. It showed up and then it got pounded.
You know why? Because the sequence is not easy to remember. It's not like CGG. Everybody can remember CGG. CGG is furin cleavage site. So you've got a whole bunch of lay people that don't know anything about how to build a virus, but they know CGG is the furin cleavage site. Everybody knows that now, right? Lay people know that, but the snake venom sequence in the GP120 doesn't roll off the tongue like that. So I think that's why it didn't get any traction.
I'm in a doctor Zoom group who didn't buy the snake venom story. I'm in a doc Zoom group with virologists and stuff. They didn't like it either.
All right. My point is, if there are chains, if there are little sequences, CGG, the GP120 sequence, all these little sequences, it's like, dude, what is this? They put the kitchen sink in here?
You needed one to be identifiably lab-derived, basically.
Yeah. I want So if I'm Fauci right now, and I've got a blue and a green outbreak, I got a blue virus and I want the attention on Wuhan.
Right.
Now I'm going to pretend like that's a conspiracy theory. You guys are out of your minds. This came from a wet market, and screw you all. You don't know what you're talking about. And
keep us squealing
for 3 years, and then just when everybody gets bored of that, you drop a raccoon dog into the story. Raccoon dog,
which looks like. The raccoon dog looks like a border collie and a raccoon.
Where the hell did they pull this out of left field 3 years in? They say, yeah, maybe the raccoon dog was in there with the pangolin in the bed.
That was like 3 months ago, right? That was
recent.
That came out of left field.
Correct.
That came out of left field. It's like, what are you?
When I interviewed you for it, you were talking about how little progress we've made in science in combating pandemics, because in 1918, the advice was wear a mask, wash your hands.
That's right.
And 100 years later, 103 years later, wear a mask, wash your hands.
It was soul crushing to find that. I was really hoping that, like in 1918, they'd be like, drink a tincture of mercury and butterfly juice. Like, I was hoping it'd be like some bizarre thing, and I'm like, we've come a long way, baby. It's the exact same.
How do you feel about the science now, though?
So I will say this. I honestly mean this. I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to science. Science has, in many ways, helped ease the suffering of this pandemic, which was more than likely caused by science. So, and that's kind of.
Hold on one second.
No. Listen.
It's coffee. I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that to you. What do you mean by that? Do you mean like perhaps there was a chance that this was created in a lab? There's an investigation.
A chance?
Well, but if
God.
there was evidence, I'd love to hear it.
There's a novel respiratory coronavirus overtaking Wuhan, China. What do we do? Oh, you know who we could ask? The Wuhan novel respiratory coronavirus lab. The disease is the same name as the lab. That's just a little too weird, don't you think? And then they ask the scientists, they're like, how did this, so wait a minute, you work at the Wuhan respiratory coronavirus lab. How did this happen? And they're like, a pangolin kissed a turtle. And you're like, no, the name of your lab, if you look at the name, let me see your business card. Show me your business card. Oh, I work at the coronavirus lab in Wuhan. Oh, because there's a coronavirus loose in Wuhan. How did that happen? Maybe a bat flew into the cloaca of a turkey and then it sneezed into my chili and now we all have coronavirus. Like, come on.
Wait a second.
What about this? Listen to this.
Wait a second.
All right.
John.
Oh my God. There's been an outbreak of chocolatey goodness near Hershey, Pennsylvania. What do you think happened? Like, oh, I don't know. Maybe a steam shovel mated with a cocoa bean. Or it's the chocolate factory. Maybe that's it.
That could be.
So here's what I want you to consider. I want you to consider that everything related to SARS-CoV-2, Wuhan, Peter Daszak, Dr. Shi, the Bat Lady, everything related to that virus is the red herring. That's Stephen Paddock. Has nothing to do with what Dr. Fauci and the United States intelligence apparatus is trying to cover up.
Got it.
Which is that one of our most strategic tools. Oops. Now, is anybody going to admit that it was intentionally released? No freaking way.
That's what science does. They push things. They do the thing like, okay, listen to this. So a few years back,
we stopped filming a long
time ago. I understand
that.
A couple of years ago, there was the 1918. Remember the last pandemic, right?
Sure.
So a bunch of scientists.
Yes, I've read up.
I was there. Look at my beard. 1918. They had a sample that I guess had been in the whatever permafrost lab in the 1918. So the idea was they were going to reanimate it so that they could study it. The 1918 pandemic flu. They had a little sample of it, and it hadn't been a scourge in the earth for 100 years. And they thought to themselves, what if we just, I don't know, woke it up? And nobody in the room was like, no, let's not do that. But they did that. Here's how I believe the world ends. And I say this to you in sincerity. Okay. It does not end. We are a screwed up world. There's racism, income inequality, fascism, authoritarianism. There are all these horrible, horrible things. Natural resources that run down. That'll all be fine. The world ends. The last words man utters are somewhere in a lab. A guy goes, it worked.
Obviously, it was an accident at Zero in Australia. Zero is
and
there.
we get to squeal. The perk is we also get to squeal about the Chinese.
Mm-hmm. We
Which
get to blame the
satisfies our
Chinese.
geopolitical crap.
And all the xenophobic crap and the China virus,
exactly.
China. And everybody.
You know, when they prosecute a bunch of Wall Street guys during the crisis in 0809, they went after a couple of Indian hedge fund managers to get the xenophobic fist bump. I know.
Well, I met one of them, Raj Rajanathan. I'll tell you that story another time.
Oh, really? Oh, that's a fascinating story.
Yeah, I'll tell you about that some other time.
This theory has not made it.
Yeah, this is this is pretty well suppressed, and imagine why that might be, right?
Yeah, I can't fathom.
So imagine if that last story we talked about 2 weeks ago, if I'm on some pretty big shit lists there, imagine the shit list I'm on now. With this, I'm a 2-time winner. So as far as
I just don't know if we rise to the level of detection.
Oh yeah, I can show you. I can show you that we do, or at least that the work I've done has.
Okay.
I did an episode with a guy who said he was using a rather sophisticated firewall tool that tracks and logs all the incoming pings on the firewall, and he said that after he did a search for "I am John Cullen," he was inundated with pings from MIT and from Halliburton and Xerox. And he was like, what the hell is going on here?
The Halliburton, I kind of get. Xerox, I'm unaware of. Oh, Xerox PARC. MIT is an absolute. MIT, Stanford, Harvard are the three big.
I'll show it to you. I'll send you a link.
Go
to
for
the
it.
video. Yeah. So it's.
Let's keep going.
right.
Let's keep going on COVID.
So how do you hide a pandemic? How do you hide? So assume, use this as a straw man hypothesis. So the straw man hypothesis is a virus gets out of Walter Reed or one of their partner labs. So for example, we partner with Zero in Australia. That's their BSL-4 laboratory in Australia. So the virus could have escaped or, accidentally, or somebody just got lazy, whatever, from that lab.
Let's not forget 46 labs in Ukraine. Let's not forget them.
But the outbreak appears to begin in Australia. So in other words, we see it and it's on the news and they're like, holy mackerel, like everybody's dying here. Like this is crazy. So we see it happen in Australia and it's in the system.
Influenza has the potential to be very dangerous, I think, compared to some issues such as Ebola or a new strain of flu such as swine flu. People have become desensitized because it's there every year. But it is certainly a serious infection.
Notifications for influenza have skyrocketed this year, hitting almost 58,000 cases so far. That dwarfs the number of notifications normally received by this time of year. Already, 139 people have died, including a 3-year-old in Victoria and a 15-year-old girl in Adelaide.
It has been a very bad year, although technically we're still not in the flu season.
It's in this, you'll see it here in this GISRS system from the WHO. So one thing we're going to need is a cover-up virus from Peter Daszak. Okay, he's got one that's got all the bells and whistles. It's got.
How do you get him to track so perfectly? How do you get him to?
I'll show you.
I would
Well,
expect
that's
him to
math.
track differently.
That's so easy. Come on, that's math. You.
I don't know.
Come on, you're going to laugh. This is so simple.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So second step in the illusion. How this, and to me, this is the goosebump moment when I realized how they did this. How do you hide a pandemic? So assume it.
Okay.
All right. Do you know that they reconstructed the 1918 Spanish flu? You know that, right? They went to Alaska. They dug up a body. They brought back lung tissue.
Yes.
And
yes. It seemed like a stupid idea, right?
Correct. Ray Kurzweil, Bill Joy,
Right.
they read a piece called Recipe for Destruction in 2005. And they said, not only are you out of your minds doing it, you're going to publish this in the public domain? You're going to put this on GenBank?
Did you read The Great Influenza, by the way? Did you read The Great Influenza? It's fantastic.
No.
It's really a great
is
book.
that David Morris?
John Barry. No, John
Barry's
Barry.
book. Yeah. Well,
I
he
read
and
that
David
back
Morris.
in 2005, and so I was ready. And I was reading about
All right.
immunology in 19 for some crazy reason. I just finished a book on the Black Death, and for some reason, just by chance, I was ready for COVID. I was primed.
Interesting.
My genetics major was 45 years old, so that wasn't going to do me any good.
All right, you're going to love
But
this
for some
then.
reason, I'd gone through a binge on immunology and
This is going to give you
pandemics.
goosebumps. Then this is going to give you goosebumps. In 1999, Johan Holton goes to Alaska, digs up an Inuit woman who passed away.
I remember
from the
this.
flu.
I remember this.
Breivik Mission, Alaska, brings the tissue back to Jeffrey Taubenberger and Terrence Tempe at Walter Reed Fort Detrick. They sequence
I didn't know that part.
Okay, they sequence it.
Right.
And then they synthesize it. And they publish the sequence on GenBank or whatever it was called, the equivalent in the day in 2005. Ray Kurzweil, who now is a senior fellow at Google, he's the guy who invented the Braille reading machine. He invented the scanner. Guy's, brilliant futurist and all that. Whether you agree with his observations or whatever is not the point. The point is, brilliant guy, invents the scanner, invents the Braille reading machine, Kurzweil keyboards, synthesizers, all that. He says Fauci and Collins are off the reservation. They're out of their minds. This is the deadliest virus. He says this is the deadliest virus mankind has ever seen. It killed 50 to 100 million people back then, and you're going to resurrect it? They did it anyway. They did it anyway. Now, that was 2005 that they publish it on GenBank. That means Kawaoka has had 15 years to figure out how to take that virus and turn off how it gives you a fever. Now
let me point out something strange. So a lot of people think that the deaths in 18 were bacterial pneumonia deaths and that we could have saved all the people if we simply had antibiotics. If you read Barry's book, one of the things you find out is that this virus ravaged the human body. Correct. This virus, they do autopsies, unlike lately where they refuse to do autopsies for reasons we surely know.
This is why.
They do autopsies and they have brain hemorrhages, and they said that, I can't remember what the gas was, but your flesh would develop pockets of gas, and when they roll the people, they sounded like Rice Krispies with milk being poured on them. And there's people said, I can't listen to a bowl of Rice Krispies get milk poured on it because it creeps me out. The people who were there, it was a horrifying flu. It was a real killer, not just bacterial. I just read this morning someone said it was bacterial deaths. No, it was not.
This virus back in 1918 turned the lungs into like a mush. Yeah, like a jelly. Yes. Like they couldn't understand what the hell is going on here, but it was post-mortem. It was post-mortem. The way they described the disease in 1918, obviously they didn't call it the Spanish flu. The reason I got that name is because Spain wasn't involved in the war, and so they reported on it because all the other countries didn't want anybody to know people were sick. Spain wasn't involved in the war.
Came from Kansas, right? Kansas, I think it was.
Yeah. So Spain reports on it. So everybody thought it was the Spanish flu. So that's how it gets that name. But back in the day, they called it the Blue Death because people's lips were turning blue from hypoxia, cyanosis.
Right.
That's okay. So now we heard those symptoms early on from doctors like Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel, Dr. Zach Bush, and they start describing people who are hypoxic with blue lips. They said it's not that they can't breathe. They don't have ARDS. It's not their diaphragm. They're not processing the oxygen. It's like they're up at 20,000 feet and they're breathing and breathing. Nothing's happening. They're not processing the O2.
It literally says the patients turn blue and then have to wait until their lungs eventually fill with fluid and then they die. The course of events there is very important. They first turn blue before their lungs have fluid in them. And so there's not a respiratory failure that leads this thing. And then eventually with fluid in their lungs, they develop pneumonia and die. This is exactly what's happening. They're presenting with hypoxia, which is a loss of oxygen in tissue. So the patients are presenting blue and with these remarkably low numbers of oxygen in the bloodstream. And yet a lot of them look pretty comfortable. They're not breathing fast. They're not in any distress. And so the doctors are freaking out, trying to figure out, why is this patient sitting here talking to me with an oxygen level this low, blue in the face, and going into multi-organ failure? Liver is the number one thing when they screened. There was a nice article that showed what is the initial laboratories of 5,000 patients presenting with COVID like symptoms in New York. Of those 5,000 patients, the vast majority didn't even have fever. The average temperature was 37 degrees Celsius, which is normal body temperature. And so they don't have fever, they don't have any signs of respiratory distress, and yet they have bump in liver enzymes. That's the only laboratory finding that seems to be consistent. Their white blood cells aren't elevated as if they have a virus. They don't have shift in triglycerides, suggesting some inflammatory event. And so there's nothing in that article I'm pouring through and show me the evidence that this person is having a viral infection. Show me the evidence that there's some signs in the immune system or otherwise that there's a virus afoot. Instead, they're dying of hypoxia. They have loss of oxygen at the tissue level, and their tissue is being starved of oxygen. And it turns out when you have a hypoxic injury, loss of oxygen in the lung, you get something called ground glass.
And they're
which was the same problem that COVID had.
Well, that's the same problem as the 1918 flu. In other words, what these doctors were describing when they thought they were seeing these early COVID cases were the symptoms that we know were the Blue Death. So when I listen to Cameron Kyle
That's
Seidel,
why they intubated the shit out of people. They would just jam that thing down their throat.
and if people start dying, then it serves everybody's scared. So let's talk about how to hide a pandemic. First thing we need to set is a scapegoat virus. We got that. Peter Daszak's got a whole book of them, right? And we get one from China, so we can blame China. And we got the Wuhan game, so that's kind of easy peasy. All right, now, how do we fool every physician on earth? That's going to be a little tougher. How do we fool?
I don't know. That sounds easy to me.
So how do we fool? It is. It turns out it's remarkably easy. And sort of the irony here is none of them want to admit it, because nobody wants to admit that they got fooled, because they think it makes them look stupid. And it doesn't make you look stupid.
And they'll get fired.
Well, they can't fire everybody. Everybody got fooled. So what happened? Right. How do you hide a pandemic? All right. So let's say you and I are part of the counterintelligence team now. And they said, listen, we got this mishap. One of Fauci and Taubenberger's strains, Kawaoka monkeyed with it, and it got out. Okay, assume the best. Assume it was an accident. Okay, but we still have to cover it up, because if anybody looks at it, they're going to go, "Oh wait, that's Taubenberger's with a Kawaoka hook." Wait, what are you guys talking about? So we have to cover it up. So how do we do it? How do we fool every physician on earth Well, let's ask Christian Drosten. What does Christian Drosten say? Christian Drosten says, oh, that's easy peasy. We need a PCR test. Give me a PCR test, and I'll make it find whatever you want me to find. And I'll give you whatever percentage of the population positive you want. What do you want? 86%, 81%, 79%? What percent do you need positive? Now, the bigger question is, if you look at the slide that's blue, there's a slide in the deck. I think it's slide number 47.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got it.
This is the
Go
PCR.
ahead.
This is the BioFire PCR test. How many strains of influenza does it test for? 5.
What slide am I looking at here? Hold on.
It's slide number 47. It says BioFire, the BioFire respiratory panel, and it's teal colored. You can't miss it. It's a big teal colored slide.
Got it.
Okay. So this is one of the most common PCR tests is BioFire. Another brand is ePlex. Another one I think is Panther. And each one of them has what they call a respiratory panel, and it tests for a certain number of things. Well, before Kerry Mullis died, he said, you really shouldn't use this for diagnostic purposes. Now,
Emphatically.
why would that? Okay.
Emphatically.
Right. So now, but we need to apply that to the real world. It's like, because he died.
By the way, Kerry Mullis dying in 2019 is a little on the suspicious side. If you really want to know,
we all agree.
Okay.
Same with Timothy Cunningham. So the issue here is this is such genius. This is such evil genius. It's spooky. How do we hide it? Let's assume Taubenberger's strain, the 1918 reconstructed pandemic influenza, this deadly virus that turns lungs to mush, it's out, and it's killing people in Australia. We know it's going to Wuhan, which means it's going around the world. How do we hide it?
You look for the common overlap of the sequence.
You don't put the strain in the PCR test.
Oh, well, that.
How easy is that?
That works.
How easy is that? Let's test for all the innocuous strains of influenza, PDM09 and H3N2, and we're going to test.
But wait a minute.
For
But
the
how
most
does the
common
flu
things? This is
how does the
absurd.
flu show? How does the flu show all those flu cases then?
Because FluView, the data is coming from coroners and medical examiners.
Okay, so they're not using the same protocol.
And it's postmortem, right? And so whether they're doing the culture, now the other thing that's fascinating here is you wonder, well, why haven't we heard from coroners? Why haven't the coroners come forward and say, what the hell's with all the flu deaths? There's over 200,000 coroners in America. It's like 230,000 coroners. What that means is the number of deaths we have, 1.2 million deaths in 3 years, divided by 200 something thousand coroners, it's only 2 or 3 extra deaths per coroner. Yeah. They're not going to notice. It's like the law of large numbers. When I take it all the way down to the individual coroner, it's 2 or 3 extra influenza deaths in the last 3 years. But multiply that out over 3 years and 240,000 coroners, 1.2 million P&I deaths. So how do you hide a pandemic? Well, step number 2, don't put the strain in the BioFire test. Now that's real easy considering the strain I'm talking about is a BSL-4 strain. It is the only BSL-4 influenza strain on Earth. BSL-4 is Ebola, Marburg, Lassa virus, and reconstructed 1918 pandemic influenza is BSL-4. It is the only BSL-4 influenza.
So you have a monopoly. You have a monopoly on the test.
Nobody has the strain in any PCR test. What the hell? How many PCR tests are testing you for Ebola? If you go get tested and you have Ebola, does it come back and say, oh, by the way, Dave, you also have Ebola? No, it's not in the test. That
explains why I feel like shit.
It's not in the test. So let's take this a little further. What if you had H7N9? H7N9 was a devastating strain of influenza that tore through Asia in 2016, 2017.
Right.
I think I came down with it. I came down with a version of influenza. I thought I was going to die. It felt like my respiratory tract was filled with shards of glass. I had a fever for 10 days. It was as bad as anything I've ever had. 2016, 2017. That's not in the test. That's not in the PCR test. What about H5N1? Is that in the PCR test? No, that's not in the test. So wait a second. You're telling me you just tested 30 million, 40 million people that could have this virus and nobody can tell? That's what I call evil genius, and I got to tip my hat to Kristen Drosten.
So you rig the PCR test to not see the flu.
You don't even have to rig it. You just don't put it in there.
Just not use it.
You just don't put it in there. It's only going to find the exact strains you put in that assay. It's got a whole bunch of little wells in it. You know what it looks like, right? It looks like a.
So how many different PCR tests does BioFire oversee?
Because the second stage primers specifically amplify only target DNA. A fluorescent double-stranded DNA binding dye is used to monitor each reaction. The second stage primers in each well are designed to detect one specific target. Organisms are identified based on which wells in the array are positive. The film array performs a melt to confirm the presence or absence of specific temperature signatures of the second stage PCR products.
It's so simple, meaning it's like a card trick. If I don't want anybody in the audience to pick the 8 of hearts, I don't put the 8 of hearts in the deck of cards. You're not going to notice it's not in there. You're never going to pick the 8 of hearts. It's not in the deck, Dave.
No, I got it. All
right, let's jump ahead. The next slide. This is the reconstruction. They brag about it on their site. The CDC tells you, look how smart we are. We went to Alaska. We dug it up. We sequenced it. Terrence Tempe used a pipette. BSL-4, he's pipetting the thing. Brilliant. Look how smart we are. Well, the next slide is another one of my favorite characters.
Do all these characters know they're working for the Dark Lords, or some of them gullible?
I don't know, man. It's so hard to look at the next character. This is Kawaoka. This guy takes it and does gain a function to make it more deadly, to say, if this was the weapon that was used against us, how would we build a countermeasure? And he's saying, if I can build it, they can build it. That's his.
It is staggering that they're putting this in the press. It is staggering. But I remember this thinking that's a stupid move. So,
all right. So they recreate this virus. Ray Kurzweil tells us, don't do this. You can jump ahead a couple slides to the New York Times article that says recipe for destruction. So Ray Kurzweil and Bill Joy. Bill Joy was the founder of Sun Microsystems, right?
Where is the rest? There we go. I got it.
Recipe for destruction. So
got it.
2005, he's calling out Fauci and Francis Collins and saying this is beyond irresponsible.
Right.
This is what leads me to believe, this is my straw man hypothesis that I'd like you to shoot down. If there was an influenza outbreak, if there was an influenza pandemic, what strain historically has killed more than 5 million people in the past? What strain presents the way we hear Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel describe? What strain would we need to cover up if, in fact, it got out because the embarrassment, having been warned not to do it, would be so great?
No, that's pretty straightforward answers. Yeah.
Right. And so if you jump ahead 2 more slides, you'll see Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel. This is the guy.
I've seen this video. All
right. So when I hear what so first of all, he says 9 days ago, he opens up an ICU ER for these patients, and the guy is freaking out. He's like, we've never seen this before. And if you listen to what he's describing against the filter of the book you just described, he's describing the Blue Death. He's telling you their lips are blue. This looks like altitude sickness. The pressure from the ventilator is doing nothing. These people need oxygen. What he didn't realize is they needed Viagra. Viagra opens up the alveoli and opens up everything. And
so anything that dilates, right?
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, but Viagra,
I'm not either.
Yeah, Viagra, albuterol, and oxygen would have helped in a big way. So, but he's panic stricken, and he's like, what he keeps saying is like, we've never seen this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm listening to what he's describing, and I'm like, he's describing the Blue Death, for God's sakes.
This is Dr. Cameron Kyle Seidel, ER and critical care doctor from New York City. 9 days ago, I opened an intensive care unit to care for the sickest COVID-positive patients in this city. In these 9 days, I have seen things I have never seen before. In treating these patients, I have witnessed medical phenomenon that just don't make sense in the context of treating a disease that is supposed to be a viral pneumonia. 9 days ago, I presumed I was opening an intensive care unit to treat patients with a virus causing a pneumonia that was ravaging lungs across the world, starting out as something mild, a cough, a sore throat, and progressively increasing in severity until ultimately ending in something called acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. This is the paradigm that every hospital in the country is working under. This is the disease, ARDS, that every hospital is preparing to treat. And this is the disease, ARDS, for which in the next 2 to 6 weeks, 100,000 Americans might be put on a ventilator. And yet, everything I've seen in the last 9 days, all the things that just don't make sense, the patients I'm seeing in front of me, the lungs I'm trying to improve, have led me to believe that COVID-19 is not this disease, and that we are operating under a medical paradigm that is untrue. In short, I believe we are treating the wrong disease, and I fear that this misguided treatment will lead to a tremendous amount of harm to a great number of people in a very short time. As New York City appears to be about 10 days ahead of the country, I feel compelled to get this information out. COVID-19 lung disease, as far as I can see, is not a pneumonia and should not be treated as one. Rather, it appears as some kind of viral-induced disease, most resembling high-altitude sickness. It is as if tens of thousands of my fellow New Yorkers are on a plane at 30,000 feet and the cabin pressure is slowly being let out. These patients are slowly being starved of oxygen. I have seen patients dependent on oxygen take off their oxygen and quickly progress through a state of anxiety and emotional distress and eventually get blue in the face. And while they look like patients absolutely on the brink of death, they do not look like patients dying of pneumonia. I have never been a mountain climber, and I do not know the conditions at base camp below the highest.
But nobody's expecting it. It's 100 years. Nobody's seen it in 100 years. Nobody's seen
Could
it.
Could you make a note to yourself to send me the link to that guy again? Because I might not have saved it.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm exhausted by 3 years of COVID, so I'm watching somewhat passively.
All right. Well,
I wrote 70 pages on COVID last year that I did not publish because I just said. No one wants to hear it anymore.
Not certain.
No, no one wants to hear it. I just said
I can't let it go. I can't let this go.
No, I got it.
Yeah, I can't. All right. So now the next slide is excess deaths. And this is important because everybody's talking about excess deaths. And everybody seems to think that the excess deaths are being caused by the vaccines. And that's bias.
Right.
I've got the data. So what you're looking at right now is the excess death chart. This is from the CDC. This is all-cause mortality.
But they have not correlated it with whether people are vaccinated or not is key. That's one of the things I've noticed is that I haven't seen someone say, okay, here's the excess deaths amongst vaccinated, here's the excess deaths amongst non-vaccinated. I've not been able to find that data.
But the group that's trying to argue against the vaccines is saying that the excess deaths most likely are caused by these vaccines. Yet,
right, definitely.
All right, but they don't show you the data. right? So what we're going to look at is the data. Because again, this is sort of the beauty of my anonymity. I'm not asking you to trust my PhD. I'm not asking you to trust me because I went to MIT. I'm asking you to look at my data. Don't trust me. So jump ahead to the next slide. In the next slide, I overlay the P&I deaths that we just looked at with the excess mortality.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
I mean, come on now. If that's not a fit, who's got a better fit than that? Nobody's got a better fit than that. That's lock and key stuff right there.
Shit.
That's your excess deaths, baby. Now, the thing is, I don't have a vaccine bias. A lot of people, so for example, Steve Kirsch, I did an interview with Steve Kirsch, and he's very much on the vaccine warpath.
Very much so.
Okay. Steve was vaccinated.
I know.
Okay. So he feels betrayed.
I know.
I don't have that bias. I'm more about the root cause.
Steve, I hate to say this, Steve is not the best spokesperson.
No.
Steve elicits. Steve's a very strong personality that elicits responses of all shapes and sizes.
Agreed. And his focus, I think, is narrowed by the fact that he feels betrayed having taken the vaccine. I'm more interested in the root cause of this. And if, in fact, this is a cover-up, which when you see that influenza disappeared from over 100 countries in 28 days, well, how could that not be a cover-up? I mean, that certainly is not an organic development.
What's killing all the people with heart attacks? Or is that anecdotal in your opinion?
Yeah, that's anecdotal, and that's the vaccines. The vaccines are a whole separate can of worms.
So they are adding to the excess deaths, but maybe not the big number.
And the excess deaths began before we had vaccines. The first peak, there were no vaccines. We didn't have any vaccines.
Right, but you could make the the layperson could make the argument. Well, that's COVID.
No, it's P&I. It's P&I.
But the layperson would say that's COVID.
But the layperson also then will say, but we overcounted COVID. So if we overcounted COVID, so in other words, you can't have the cake and eat it too. So you either believe 1.2 million people died of COVID in the United States. And if you believe that, then we get into...
And the excess death should be huge. Enormous.
And you have to say, well, wait a second. 1.2 million died in the United States and half of that died in India?
Right. No, I get that. I get that.
So don't you think maybe we overcounted? Well, if we overcounted and really 1.2 million didn't die, it's more like 100,000. Well, then what accounted for those excess deaths? P&I.
Well, why didn't P&I take out India then? Why didn't P&I take out India too?
Well, let's go country by country, and we're going to take a look. So that's where we're going next. So let's take a look at the map. And on this iteration of the map, let's see what we have here. Next slide. Okay, this is
I'm seeing something with superimposed stuff up in the upper level.
So the
selected jurisdiction. Okay.
So the superimposed stuff, that the blue on the blue.
I'm seeing a zoom in on the excess deaths. Am I?
Yeah. So the excess deaths, what you're looking at is the P&I. And the excess deaths superimposed on one another to show that it's pretty clearly a fit. Now you jump ahead to the next one, you'll see the map. We get back to the mapping system.
It's a super fit, right?
Yeah. So the next one is
R
the
factor of about 0.95.
There you go. Now the next one is Thailand. So we're looking at Thailand now. Now, why is Thailand relevant and important? Like Vietnam, there's a phenomenon that occurred in Thailand that is evident in the mapping system, if you understand how they used it. On the right-hand side are three charts, a red one, a white one, and a green one. The red one is cases, the white one is deaths, and the green one is inoculations given. Prior to the rollout of the inoculations in Thailand, there weren't 200 people dead.
Right.
Then you see correct.
Total?
Correct. There weren't 200 people dead in Thailand when they started the inoculation program. Then you look at the green chart and the white chart. The green are inoculations and the white are deaths. And what you say to
Okay.
yourself is, if you're a public health person, that's not what we had in mind.
Right.
The idea is not to have the white go up as the green goes up. It's to not have any white, which is where you were before the green. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the detail. One more slide. So this is where we zoom in. And so you're seeing cases in red, deaths in white, and inoculations in green. Now, I'm not saying, causation and correlation don't, not necessarily, right? But it's an interesting place to start. How did people start dying in Thailand as they started the inoculation program, and people weren't dying in Thailand prior to? This is the kind of data you're going to need to show. If you want to show that the inoculations cause something, you're going to need to show correlative data like what we're seeing here in the mapping system. Okay, so this is why it's useful. Now you jump ahead to the next slide. This is Vietnam. Vietnam had no one.
They also did on Thailand. The cases didn't even show up until 2021.
Correct. Minor handful of cases, a couple thousand, nothing major. Now go to Vietnam. Vietnam had no one dead for like a year, and when they rolled out their vaccine program, same thing, same sort of correlation. The white are the deaths, the green are the vaccines. And if you jump ahead one slide, you'll see the detailed
the white
correlation.
seems to precede the green a little bit. The white seems to precede the green. Tell me about that.
But again, there weren't 200 people dead in a country with 100 million
so that's a
people.
small number.
Yeah,
that's a small number. Okay.
Now, after they begin the vaccine program, there's 40-something thousand people dead in the country. And again, like you said with the cases, look at the red chart. The cases didn't really come on strong until the vaccine program was pretty well wrapped up.
Yeah.
People were dying, but not before they started the inox, before the
that's
inoculations.
consistent.
Yeah.
That's consistent with the idea of the vaccine actually ripping your immune system to shreds.
Same thing. Next page is Malaysia. So when you see the same phenomenon in Thailand, in Malaysia, in Vietnam, the same thing, this correlation where very few people had died of COVID prior to the inoculations. Then the inoculations come on and people just start dying. It's like, what the hell? How did you let that happen?
Well, just to devil's advocate, that spike in the white curve is also the flu /COVID season, right? So it would be expected to rise at that point.
Yes, but according to the WHO, there's no influenza in Malaysia. There's no influenza in Vietnam. It's gone, right? So it's eradicated. All right, so let's jump ahead one or two slides. There's a slide there that says, could you hide one pandemic behind another? Right.
Is that the Fauci slide?
Yeah, and that's sort of the question I've been asking for.
With Xi Jinping behind him.
Yeah, hide and poo seek. So the idea being, if in fact he had this type of challenge, could you hide a pandemic? Well, don't put the strain in the PCR test. Stop doing viral cultures. That's another key piece. No more viral cultures. Nobody's doing those anymore. They're too expensive. And I need another virus that I can pin this on, that if I do a PCR test on it, all I have to do is run it at 42, 43 cycles, and I'll find it. We'll find it. Everybody's going to have
Which
it.
Which was known to be a ridiculous cycle count by any mechanism. I know. It drove me nuts.
All right, so jump ahead with me one more slide or two. There's a BBC News story here. 1918 killer flu secrets revealed. It's got a red banner on the top. BBC News. 1918 killer flu secrets revealed.
Is this a Legal Information Institute? Is that a Cornell Law?
No.
I
Right after the Dr. Fauci.
Right there. I got it.
Right after Dr. Fauci. All right, so 1918 killer flu secrets revealed. Scientists have worked out how the virus which caused the world's worst flu epidemic infected man. And then they figure out, what was this? What was that? How does this work? How does that work? If this virus were to get out and start this type of pandemic, what might that look like? One more slide. I found this odd. there were a bunch of things happening in March of 2020 before that many people were dead. Like Hillary said we should vote by mail. And when she said this was March 18th. There weren't 200 people dead in America. And she wanted to vote by mail? That seems like a problem that hasn't yet materialized, and yet she has the solution ready to go.
Yeah.
There's not 200 people dead.
Face right now.
Yeah. There's not 200 people dead in the country.
Well, so you can watch the Democrats, by the way. You can watch them go from saying Trump's a jerk for claiming this is a problem. All of a sudden they go, whoa, 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 note to self. Let's flip this narrative. They flipped it very quickly. They said, oh, we can turn this on Trump.
Sure did.
So, sure did.
And I want to show you how the gaps, we're going to go to that Doc 2 that I sent you. And what that's going to look at is the gaps in the WHO report where there is no influenza. Right? We looked at, let's say, Sweden, right? And it disappears and then it reappears a year and a half, 2 years later. What would happen if we put the COVID deaths in that gap? Would that fit? Ooh.
Okay.
We're going to take a look at that when we come back from our break. But right now, I want to show you this thing that says 21 U.S. Code 360 BBB. And
got it.
This is another one of the things that makes me think that this was intentional and somewhat conspiratorial. If you jump to the next slide, this is the law. And what the law said for an EUA is that the product needs to prevent the disease. That's why we're giving you the authorization, is that we're doing this either for PCR tests, diagnostics, for therapeutics like molnupiravir or Paxlovid or whatever, and for preventatives. And that's your Pfizer, your Moderna. But we then learned that the products don't prevent the disease.
Right.
If the president got it and his wife got it and the secretary got it and this one got it and everybody got it, but they had already been inoculated. So if the product doesn't prevent the disease,
it's not legal.
Well, doesn't the EUA get rescinded? I mean, how is right? Now, the other thing about the EUA, there's another aspect here, which is if there had been a therapeutic treatment that was found to be effective, the vaccines never would have gotten the EUA approval in the first place.
Which is why they had to step on all the therapeutics.
Correct. Now, so in other words, if ivermectin,
you know the third one, you know the third one.
What's that?
It turns out they retain their protection if it's a vaccine for children.
I've heard that.
And that's a twisted reality, because that means we're vaccinating kids with a potentially dangerous vaccine just to give them legal protection. Yeah, that's the most evil of them all.
Well, in particular, when you see how many children actually died of COVID. So this is another element, right?
Zero. Zero.
Well, so that's the thing, is I wanted to be able to use a really fine point and confront people. And this is where my lack of social skills, you start to see, the Asperger's come out. I don't care, right? I don't care if I get people upset by confronting them with a simple question like, how many school-aged children died with COVID in Los Angeles?
Right.
According to Los Angeles County Department of Public Health, how many school-aged children died with COVID in the last 3 years? People have such a hard time simply saying, I don't know. I don't know. Nobody wants to say, I don't know. I don't know. Everybody wants to say.
I think the numbers are so small. The numbers are so small that they're a rounding error of 0.0. They are absolutely minuscule.
But again, to me, the issue is that they haven't gone reported. In other words, if the actual number of kids, so the number of kids in Los Angeles, school age, so 5 years old to 17 years old. Okay, so 5, right? We hope you don't pee in your pants. 17, you're driving daddy's Tesla. Okay, so from 5 to 17, 18 kids have died in Los Angeles in 3 years with COVID. So that includes the kid that had COPD. It includes the 2 kids that had cystic fibrosis. It includes the kid that had necrotic cancer, and 1 kid had leukemia. One kid died of fentanyl poisoning and
They
tested
were all
positive.
comorbidities. They
and
were
tested
all
positive.
comorbidities.
Right.
Yep.
So did one kid get it and die? Maybe. But the total number is 18. The issue is nobody knows the number. The number in New Jersey is 11.
Well, I've heard the total number in the country is 500 and something, which is consistent with those numbers.
I tracked it and reported it constantly. And that was what Laura Ingraham was tweeting of mine. Laura Ingraham was sending out my pie charts with the numbers of kids dying, going, why are the schools closed? Because I had this behind the scenes relationship with Laura Ingraham.
And that was Randy Weingarten, that bitch.
So I hope you're finding this interesting.
It is interesting. It is.
Different.
And I'm a little surprised I hadn't even gotten a whiff of this theory. Okay, so I'm on Doc 2 and I'm seeing a green plot.
That's it. All right. That is COVID deaths, all deaths with COVID in the United States by week, period. USA only. All deaths with COVID.
It's looking familiar now.
Okay. Look how fast that onset is. And I don't know if you remember.
Week 12?
Yeah. Now.
Could that be us testing? The appearance of testing?
That is Donald Trump says we've got a national emergency, 13,000 if you've got one, 39,000 if you intubate them, and go.
That's right. It went fast, didn't it?
Bugatti Veyron doesn't go 0 to 10,000 that fast.
Yeah.
All right. So
it was fast, wasn't it?
Benford's law. Benford's rolling over in his grave right now, going, numbers don't work like that. Gompert's curve, Gompert's law.
Benford's law is the probability of the first digit being 1 through 9.
That it's zero, yes, and that that numbers behave a certain way.
Right.
Again,
even random ones, even seemingly random.
And in particular, when we're talking about large numbers, right? So when we move into the law of large numbers and we're talking about populations of 300 million people, 200 million people, 100 million people, the law of large numbers is helping us see these patterns. So when you see an onset like that violates every law of how mathematics works and how numbers work, that's got to raise at least a yellow flag for you. I mean, you got to wonder, well, how the hell did it come on that fast, that hard? Now, to your point, didn't the test kits, weren't they contaminated?
I don't remember that.
The test kits were contaminated.
This may be a new pathogen that circulates around the world, similar to the flu virus. H1N1 is oftentimes part of the flu shot now that people get. So coronavirus could be a new pathogen that's been introduced to the world that may be similar to the flu virus in terms of how it's transmitted.
On testing, we had to change things that were done. We had to change things that were done. On testing, we had to change things that were done.
Today, the director of the CDC testifying before Congress, fielding questions about the delay in getting test kits to health providers around the country.
The CDC's focus was to provide testing for the public health system. There's a whole other system we need testing for, clinical medicine. And I'm happy to say now, with LabCorp and Quest both operational as of yesterday, there's really laboratory testing availability to any doctor's office that can go through LabCorp and Quest. I would have loved the private sector to be fully engaged 8 weeks ago.
The CDC plans to aggregate all testing data collected by LabCorp, Quest Diagnostics, and public health labs with the goal of tracking how many Americans have been tested and what those test results are.
Like CDC, the state and local and territory health departments are underfunded. And I want to rebuild the core capabilities so that we have data and data monitorization. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a data system that every health department in this country right now could see in real time so that we could predict what's going on and where to go and where to put assets? We don't have that.
Most people who get COVID-19 will experience mild symptoms, and many will never have to be tested. But Redfield did reiterate a warning about travel for certain groups of people.
We have recommended that the elderly and vulnerable, including children with chemotherapy and others, should really reconsider at this point travel.
According to Johns Hopkins University, over 118,000 cases of COVID-19 have been recorded worldwide, with over 800 here in the U.S.
I do think the CDC remains the premier public health institution in the world. We have really thousands of outstanding men and women that work 24/7 to serve this nation, both with this pandemic and other threats. I do think there's been a mischaracterization about, quote, the flub. We developed a test, as I've mentioned to you before, literally within probably 7 to 10 days from the sequence. That test was developed at CDC to put eyes on this outbreak for our health departments. That test was never flawed. It works fine today as it did then. When we did try to expand that test to give it to each of the local health departments, there was a manufacturing problem in one of the reagents that had to be corrected that took about 5 weeks. And then we corrected that for the public health labs. But the defect, the real defect from my point of view in the whole response was that the private sector took a long time to get involved to provide testing for the medical community at large.
Wait a minute, you think the defect is in the private sector? I understand the difficulty of moving things just from state labs to private sector. That wasn't done fast enough. But there was basically just sloppy lab work, according to the New York Times, in the test kits themselves. And as you said, that delayed things for 5 weeks. 5 weeks is, that's a critical 5 weeks.
Well, I will say that there was evidence in the inquiry that was done that there was contamination, and again, that contamination was corrected. I will say, Anderson, and I think you know that if you look historically about the pace in which we were able to develop a laboratory test for this new virus and deploy it, even with that 5-week delay, is really still one of the most rapid engagements of a
but your laboratory test wasn't all that,
pathogen.
from what I understand, and I may be wrong, I'm certainly no scientist, and you are a very respected scientist, I should point out, and a very well-respected doctor. My understanding is the test that was quickly developed essentially wasn't that much better than the tests that were already out there overseas.
We had a test kit debacle. And this is the one time Anderson Cooper holds Redfield. Redfield was the head of the CDC at the time. And Anderson Cooper says, what the hell? What do you mean we don't have test kits for 6 weeks? What are you talking about? We don't have test kits for 6 weeks. How are you managing a pandemic? And he says, well, they got contaminated and we're really counting on the private sector.
I now remember this. I remember this now.
We had to rejigger the test kits. Huh.
Did Redfield switch teams?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think he got wind of what happened. I mean, I know Laura Ingraham knows what happened, right? I know she knows what happened. I know the president knows what happened. He knows what happened. But again, they consider this stuff.
We know Biden doesn't know what happened.
Yeah,
Biden doesn't know what time of day it is.
No, he doesn't know how many times he had COVID. He has no idea. But what's interesting here is how they consider these things national secrets, national security, and therefore, like, even the president can't talk about it. Like, Trump might want to tell you, you know what? Here's the real story. It was the flu. Fauci's an idiot. He can't tell you that stuff. They consider this national security. He can't go tell you everything he wants to tell you. He can't tell you about Vegas. They consider that state secrets. That's why I'm on all these lists and stuff.
So guys like Atlas are holding it in, and you think that all those guys are holding it in?
I don't know how many of them know that it was apparently this H1N1 or a Kawaoka special version that's got even worse aspects to it. All right, so let's look at the green. So the green thing comes on like hell on wheels.
Right.
But what else happened? Jump ahead one slide with me.
Look at the stop. Whoa.
Right. Didn't influenza fall off a cliff like hell on wheels?
Oh, that's a completely ridiculous curve. That's a completely ridiculous curve.
Wait a second, though.
Wait a minute.
What was that movie? Where
12.
It's 11 through 14. In every country, it's 11 through 14. Weeks 11 through 14. It's the middle of March, March 13th through the first week of April.
So flu fell off exactly at the same time
as the announcements. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So now
that's a problem.
You got the fall off of the flu. You're looking at the United States right now. So you got a big thing on the left, a little double hump thing on the right. And now you go to the next slide, which is the COVID deaths. Instead of in 3D, I put them in 2D. Okay. Instead of 3D, it's 2D now. But we still have that rapid onset. And I said, wait a second. Left, right, left, right. Let's go to the next slide. Left, right, left, right. Wait a second. What did Renee Zellweger say? You complete me. Look at the side by side.
You complete me.
Are we on the double plot slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Jump ahead
Completely.
two.
So you add the two together.
And you're going to get to an overlay slide. When you get to slide number 8, you're going to see the overlay.
I still can't see the slide numbers. It's killing me.
Okay.
Oh, there it is. Oh, that's perfect.
So what we're looking at now are all deaths with COVID time aligned with the mysterious eradication of influenza. You complete me.
So the deaths are picking up from the influenza, and then all of a sudden the COVID picks up the credit around 14 weeks in.
So here's your hypothetical straw man. The phone call comes into Geneva, where the World Health Organization is based.
I can't be the only guy who keeps hearing pinball wizard every time you say who. Go ahead.
All right. So the World Health Organization's in Geneva, and they're recording all of these influenza specimens for all these countries. And in 28 days, it's just over. It's like magic. Right. And at the same time, this new horrifying disease called COVID from China that came from bats and pangolins, a cave. It's got a CGG in it too. It's got a furin cleavage site. And it's really, 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 really bad. So you probably want this new kind of vaccine that we don't grow in eggs in order so that you don't die from this, because you don't want to die from this because it's really, 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 really bad. But
you complete me. That's an interesting line.
You complete me.
All right, so let's jump ahead another. So
the
slide.
second half of the bell curve just got added in.
All right, so this is it in gray.
Hold on.
So what I'm doing now is I'm overlaying the WHO's influenza with worldometers.
This is Sweden. This is the gray one. Got it.
Right. So now you see Sweden, and then I overlay it. So I show you one, show you the other, and then we do the overlay. Right. So with Sweden, you're going to see the influenza.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Then you see the COVID, and then I time align them. So they're time aligned. So next one, what's the next one? Italy. So Italy, you'll see influenza disappears, same weeks 11 through 14. Then you see how the COVID deaths came on. Remember we were talking about how in Bergamo, all hell broke loose and everybody was dying in Italy like crazy? You see it right here. You see the rapid onset of the deaths in Italy. Now let's put the two together. And what do you get? Ooh, baby.
Perfect bell curve. Look at that bell curve.
It's kind of like a Reese's Pieces. In fact, Gompertz is now saying that's what I'm talking about. That's how numbers behave. That's how a peak should show a shoulder.
Looks like one of my exams. Looks like grade point average on one of my exams.
You see the peak out to the right? On Italy?
Yeah.
You see the alignment? You see the alignment of the COVID deaths and the influenza specimens? It's like all of a sudden they said, "Oh, we should stop." Okay. 2 years later, they start reporting influenza specimens, and obviously they didn't really want them to do that.
And so they fucked up for a brief period there.
All right, jump ahead. Next one. Who do we have next?
So that means there was no COVID. There was
there is COVID. No, there is COVID. There is COVID. There is COVID. But if you
but look at the superimposed one. It's almost completely swallowed by the influenza plot data.
I understand. So what I'm suggesting is yes, COVID's real, but so the deaths, I'm going to tell you 95% of these people that died from the influenza. But because of the way the PCR works, when you cycle it at 42, 43, 45 times,
You pick up COVID.
Everybody's going to pick up, right. You're going to pick up COVID in the cottage cheese. So
So for people who don't understand the cycling, the claim is that around 26, 28 cycles is as high as you should ever go. To do 42 means it's round number, a factor of 2 to the 14th increase in sensitivity. And that comes out to a truly gargantuan number.
Yeah. It's like turning the ISO on your camera to a billion.
Right. Exactly.
And pointing it at the night sky. So you're going to pick up a lot of noise. But you will also pick up some stars. So by cycling it so high, you're going to get a lot of these positives. We know that that's going to happen. And you're not going to pick up that other virus.
Let me ask you this: did they turn the cycling down right during the off season? Do you think?
Well, they did turn it down when they were ready to wind down the pandemic. Yes, they did.
No, but there's the seasonal dips.
Yeah,
along the way.
I don't know.
And you'd have to turn down the PCR. I remember the discussion. I remember them saying, "Oh, we shouldn't be cycling 42 times. We should 20." I'm wondering if they did that at the right time to get no COVID deaths during the off season.
Possibly, but what I can tell you now is more people are dying of PNI than COVID in the USA for the last year. And nobody's mentioned it. It's not on the news. Nobody knows. It's a big secret. So I want to show you more examples, because the more examples I can show you, the more it's like I like piling on with evidence. I like to show so much overwhelming evidence of a phenomenon that it can't be ignored. So the next is
I'm
the
in
UK.
the United Kingdom. Got
Okay.
it.
So they got these weird gaps in the UK in their reporting where all of a sudden there's just like no data. And then all of a sudden
I would just assume they screwed up. All
right. So now jump ahead and look at the COVID deaths and the rapid onset one more time. So what we saw that in Italy. We see it in the UK. Very steep onset, comes out of nowhere. And when we overlay it on top of the missing specimens, the time alignment is just kind of like, and I might be off by a smidge. In other words, somebody really should sit down and do this right, but I'm close enough for horseshoes and hand grenades, as we used to say in Brooklyn.
Well, it also depends on the lag they have on their data reporting and stuff like that.
All right, but again, that's why I'm showing you example after example. Jump ahead. Next one. Who do we have?
Oh, look at that drop off. That's spectacular.
What's our next country?
This is Canada. I have Canada.
Look at the drop off.
Yeah.
Okay, now
I'm going to look at the overlay. I'm going all the way to the overlay.
There you go.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That gets rid of that drop off.
Next one. Switzerland.
I'll go to
Okay.
There it is again.
Fit them in. Look at that. It's like a secret. It's like a secret decoder.
Australia looks like Australia is fascinating.
Look at that big mountain out to the left.
So that would be your argument that they took the full hit of the flu.
Correct. That's where it started. That's it. That was there. Right. They said 4 times more people died.
Oh, that's July 19. That's July 19.
Right. They take that outbreak with them to Wuhan and they wrestle and swim, and that's it. That's all you need. Viruses do what viruses do. And if it's this virus, if it's the one I think it is, it does it better than anyone we've ever seen ever. This is the one. This is the one that does it better than anybody. This is the Mark Spitz of viruses.
So they really claim in all these countries, they really claim that there was just no flu whatsoever for 2 years.
Gone. And nobody documents it. Nobody notices this. But the weird guy from YouTube. But the weird YouTube guy with the map. I'm the only guy documenting this.
Very strange.
And the fact that the COVID deaths fit in there like a magic secret decoder ring.
You complete me.
Oh, baby.
You complete me.
How romantic is that? It's like if you were going to hide a pandemic, why would you do it? Why would you hide a pandemic? Why not just tell everybody we're not sure if you've got mumps or measles. So what we want you to do is go get tested. You're going to get tested from, we're going to tell you if you have mumps or you have measles. And if you have this, we're going to give you this. And if you have that, we're going to give you that. How complicated was that? That didn't take me 10 seconds to describe. You might have COVID,
So let me
you might have influenza.
backtrack to double. Let me backtrack just to make sure I got the motive right. That is that if the pandemic was clearly the Spanish flu strain, then you'd hide it.
Have to. National security.
So that's your model is therefore they had to hide the one that was clearly lab derived or
was
derived.
Kawaoka, right? So in other words, it could be Barrick, it could be Kawaoka, right? It doesn't have to be the Taubenberger strain. They started.
What it is it's embarrassing to the system.
Right. It came from one of our, whether it came from Galveston or it came from Wisconsin or it came from University of North Carolina or it came from Walter Reed. At the end of the day, that's like which table were you sitting at the Godfather's wedding? It's like, what the hell difference does it make? You were at the Godfather's wedding. You were at table 4, table 6. You were there. It doesn't really matter.
So they released the flu data in 2022. Most of the countries seem to release the flu data in 2022.
Comes back, right?
Right.
But nobody reports it.
Is that a normal level? Is that a normal level?
No, it was
a normal flu.
No. The outbreak that came back in Australia. Go back up to Australia. Go back up. Australia was a couple slides earlier. And we were commenting.
Oh, that's a big chunk, honking chunk.
Yeah. And same thing in Netherlands. The return of the influenza was massive. Same thing. Yeah, look at Netherlands when it is in there.
So why did they let it reappear? What was this? It seems like someone screwed the pooch.
Right. It seems like they weren't counting on keeping it suppressed for 2 years. And at some point, somebody in Geneva just let it go.
Fuck it.
And then
Got it.
But it's not in the news. It's not in the media. Nobody knows that it returned and more people are dying from influenza than COVID in the Netherlands. I talked to people in the Netherlands on Twitter. There's no press on this. Nobody knows this is happening. So it's as if they're returning to normal.
Why didn't Sweden? So Sweden's rep is they didn't get hit hard at all. What's that about?
I don't know. Well, what happened to influenza in Sweden? Right. So maybe not a lot of in other words, Sweden may have had a different set of PCR tests that they didn't run at 43 cycles. And Sweden's like, what are you guys talking about? There's not that many COVID cases here. Same
Sweden
thing.
Definitely bucked the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, there's also many countries develop their own vaccines. A lot of people don't understand this. Kazakhstan has its own vaccine. Cuba has its own vaccine. And these
I didn't know that.
And these are approved by the
China
WHO.
did.
Yeah, and these are approved by the
China
WHO.
and Russia did.
Yeah. So China has Sinovac, Russia has Sputnik, but Kazakhstan has a vaccine. Cuba has a vaccine. A lot of countries develop their own products. Yeah, and they're approved by the WHO. They're approved by the WHO. So what I wanted to share with you was a bunch of evidence, data from the WHO, from the CDC, that illustrates that, according to the WHO, influenza disappeared miraculously in 28 days from over 100 countries for about 2 years. And according to the CDC, it's the #1 comorbidity of COVID. And the system from coroners and medical examiners tells us 1.2 million people died from influenza and pneumonia in the last 3 years. Now, the press story, the Walensky and Fauci story is 1.2 million people died from COVID. But 120,000 people died in China. 500,000 died in India. 30,000 in Pakistan, less than 35,000 in Bangladesh. And we've got
the doubters will say they're just so third world they don't keep track. That's what your data is good. I'm not saying your data doesn't make that case. I'm just saying that if it were a headline, they would just say, well, I don't trust India, I don't trust Pakistan, I don't trust, you name it.
Well, then we got to stop sending money to the WHO because, again, we're using.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, then what's the point? If we're not going to cite the official data, and we can't trust the official, in other words, well, then how did you declare a pandemic? Based on what? Hearsay? You knew a guy? You knew a guy at ProMed named Madoff,
Right.
and so you declared a pandemic, even though you didn't trust the data because there was a new pneumonia in Wuhan.
Right.
Well, today, Wuhan, a city of 10 million people, has fewer dead than West Virginia. There's not 5,000 people dead in Wuhan. It's a city of 10 million people. Shanghai doesn't have 1,000 dead. Beijing doesn't have 50 dead. And you're sort of like, did China just pull a Barry Sanders juke move? Did China just juke us out of our shoes with a bunch of propaganda to get us to overreact to something? China has slightly more dead than California, with 1.4 billion people. Peru has more dead than China. How the hell does Peru have more dead than China if it's the China virus?
Right.
So we can't just dismiss everybody. What, Peru? Peru is magical at counting. Peru's the great counters. They've got 200,000 people dead.
So let me in. Australia and New Zealand
Mm-hmm.
went the most full-on Nazi of any two countries.
Right, lockdown.
Is there a reason why? Why did they go, full authoritarian state?
Well, it's going to sound terrible. It's going to sound terrible, but the truth is lockdowns work, and it's how they were able to mitigate disaster in 1918 is they locked down Australia, and there's stories about that.
Is that true? They have a record from 1918 of being brutal? I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Okay.
So they locked it down hard. And, again, I love Jay Bhattacharya and Martin Kulldorff. I have great respect for these guys. I really love them. And I'm not a proponent of lockdowns, right? I don't want anybody to say, okay, do you remember when they locked down, what the hell's the name of the town? New Rochelle. They locked down New Rochelle, became the first quarantine community in the United States. Was New Rochelle.
Well, in the great pandemic of 1348, one of the highest correlations was, I think, the city of Rome, because what they would do is if you got a case of the plague, which apparently was 3 superimposed pandemics, ironically, if you got a case, they walled up the entire family inside their house and they all died inside. They just boarded them up and left them to die. And that kept the thing in check is the claim.
Yeah, well, again, I'm not a proponent of the government telling you need to do this, you need to do that, what have you. But there's also just the pure data and efficacy. So while everybody's saying that the COVID zero policies in China are this and that and quite critical, I'm looking at the Johns Hopkins data and saying, but if there's less than 50 dead in Beijing, don't tell me it doesn't work. It may not be ideal. I don't want to participate in it. I'm not going to recommend it, but don't tell me it doesn't work. If there's 595 people dead in Shanghai, don't tell me it doesn't work. Right? So from a social perspective, I'm on board. I love these guys. I don't want to, lockdowns. No. But don't tell me it doesn't work. If Ebola became as virulent as norovirus. Norovirus is so virulent that if somebody had it in the hotel room that you check into 3 days later, you're probably going to get it. That's how
That's
how
a
nasty.
problem.
Right.
That's a problem.
All right. So Ebola, if it became like norovirus, wouldn't you want to be on an island in the middle of the Pacific?
Yeah. I'm looking at Singapore data. That's interesting. The Singapore data jumped way ahead. I've been flipping through your data set. Singapore drops off a cliff, but coronavirus does not show up.
Correct.
What is that all about?
Again, different countries had different motivations. Singapore didn't have an election coming up, that they had a whole bunch of people that really wanted this vote by mail. So Singapore wasn't caught up in that aspect of it. But
it fell off a cliff. It's the you complete me argument.
Correct. So
it doesn't
influenza
show up in Singapore. It doesn't
Right,
show
so-
up in Singapore.
All right, so there's two different aspects here. So one aspect is the disappearance of the influenza at the exact same time in all these countries, which is clearly not organic, right? So that's subterfuge of some
In
form.
Singapore, you see that. You can see it in Singapore's data.
See, right. Now, whether or not those countries experience what they are going to call an onset of COVID deaths has a lot to do with politics. Singapore,
Their testing protocols and stuff. Yeah.
well, right. So Singapore is not really part of the group of countries that really wants to get rid of Trump. France is, Germany is,
Right.
the UK is, the Netherlands are. So all of these, you got all of these World Economic Forum leaders now, like Mark Rutte in Netherlands and Macron and all these guys, and they're not real fond of Trump. And so
It looks to me, however, like the Singapore went a year and a half without reporting any deaths from either virus is the oddity.
Well, we don't know about influenza because I haven't tapped into Singapore's Ministry of Health influenza deaths from them. So that's like the difference. So for example, we see a delta between what the WHO is telling us about the United States and what the United States systems are telling us. So if I tapped into Singapore,
this is the WHO.
Right. So what I think happened is somebody at the WHO shut down this,
Spigot.
it's gone.
Yeah.
I mean,
Got it.
I'm assuming they don't use a fax machine, right? The fax machine didn't run out of paper for a year and a half. Right.
Yeah.
So
it looks to me like they just didn't report anything.
Now you got to then ask yourself, well, who has that type of control over the WHO? Who donates so much money to the WHO
Gates.
that they could make something like this happen?
Gates.
How do you make a pandemic just disappear and replace it with another pandemic? How do you do that? Out with one, in with another, from China, from a bat, from a wet market, from Peter Daszak, with a pangolin, with a raccoon dog, with a CGG, with a GP120. If you put more stuff on this fishing lure, you're going to catch a whale. I mean,
right.
They loaded it up with the kitchen sink. The story's perfect. You blame China, and nobody's talking about Walter Reed. Nobody's talking about Fort Detrick. Nobody's talking about Galveston. Nobody's talking about Wisconsin. Everybody's talking about COVID. Everybody's talking about Wuhan. I could care less. You know why?
So Hungary falls off a cliff too.
Hungary's my favorite. And so the people who say it's viral interference, here's the fun comeback to that. When influenza,
that's the word I was looking for.
The viral interference.
Viral interference.
All right. So here's the fun part. So influenza is the number one comorbidity of COVID in the United States. So that's not what we call interference. Right. That's what we call comorbidity, number one. So that's a good argument. Now, argument number two. How many people were infected with COVID in Hungary when influenza completely disappeared? Less than 500. How many people had died? Less than 100. So with less than 500 people infected, influenza just completely disappeared from the entire country? That's unlikely. And
again, it looks like Hungary just stopped reporting. There's someone just shut down.
It's my favorite example. Hungary's my favorite one. Hungary just it's like El Capitan. It's the El Capitan. It's just gone. Vertical.
And by the way, if there's a rogue nation in Europe, it's Hungary.
It is. It's Orban. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Orban. Orban.
Yeah. But
who I would vote for president if he gave me the choices we're looking at, right?
And I loved his interview with Tucker. And yet influenza disappeared. So when it disappears from all these countries, you got to say, so wait a second, come on. All these people couldn't be in on it. You've got a choke point in Geneva. Remember the field hospitals?
Yes.
Javits, the Hope, the Glory, we had
empty,
the ships.
Empty.
Nobody was there. What's the red flag on the field hospitals? There's a red flag there that everybody missed.
I missed it. What is it?
When did they put them away?
I don't know. What's the red flag? It's a cross, I thought.
Well, when did they put them away? So first of all, how many did they build? And then second, when did they put them away? Well, they built them in every major city. There were 4 of them in Rhode Island. 4 field hospitals in Rhode Island. Okay,
That's
I
more
don't
than
even know
basketball courts.
Yeah, I mean, besides Providence, what else is there in Rhode Island? There's 4 places to put. I didn't even know that.
Newport.
I guess. I don't know whether I know there were 4 in Rhode Island. So they built them everywhere. So everybody sees Javits on television. What they don't realize is, no, they were in Miami, St. Louis, Cincinnati. I mean, everywhere there were field hospitals. And they were put away on May 1st. But they were ready April 20th. Why were they only standing for 11 days? 11 days? No, come on. This is the largest call-up of the National Guard in the history of the United States since D-Day. Excuse me, since D-Day. So since D-Day, this was the largest National Guard call-up we've had to deploy field hospitals in every city in the country. Okay. They had to be ready April 20th. We put them away May the 1st. They stood for 11 days.
So why?
How many people were dead when we said, oh my God, we better build field hospitals? There weren't 200 people dead in the country. There weren't 200 people dead in America when we said it's time to build field hospitals everywhere.
And surreal, the thing I'm groping with, that I don't have a problem with, because you could say we just jumped on it knowing it was a problem. I can live with that. But to put them away May 1st is surreal. 11
days.
Yeah, so what's the answer to that? Why only 11 days?
Well, I don't know for sure. Again, correlation and causation, it's sometimes hard to prove, but there's a bunch of things that did happen in the same time frame. So March 13th is the day that Trump declares a national emergency in all 50 states.
Right.
And March 28th, for the first time in maybe 10 or 12,000 years, a meteor impacts Earth in Akure, Nigeria, March 28th of 2020.
I remember that.
How
did I miss that?
Because it was hidden. It was covered up.
When something flies by their window, it might be out on that lawn, which is wide, at least half of a playing field. Because there's no explaining what your imagination can make you see and feel. Your body wants nothing, you'll be hypnotized. Now it's not a meaningless question to ask if they've been and gone. I remember a talk about North Carolina in a strange, strange pond. You see, the sides were like glass in the thick of a forest without a road. And if any man's hand ever made that land, then I think it would have showed. And that's why it seems like a dream. They got me hypnotized. And I know that's right. say there's a place down in Mexico where a man can fly over mountains and hills. He don't need an airplane or some kind of engine, and he never will.
The reason it was covered up is because it was the first of about 30 or 40 that were headed our way. And
are they still headed our way?
And they were headed our way. So March 28th was when they said to the president, "Sir, the first one appears to have hit."
Somebody here.
That was March 28th.
Are you going to say the field hospitals were for the meteor?
I don't know, but I can show you the data from JPL. I have all the ephemera. And the convergence was April 27th. The hospitals were put away May 1st. They were ready April 20th. The convergence of 30 asteroids is April 27th. And on May the 1st, the hospitals were put away. They told you, they said, these are not for coronavirus patients. This is if the hospital system is overwhelmed, we're going to transfer people here. Do not bring your COVID patients here. This is not for COVID. This is if the hospital system is overwhelmed. It was ready April 20th. It was put away May the 1st. And the convergence of the 30 asteroids that I did a 3D model thing where you can see what's happening using the ephemera. And that's what I shared with Laura Ingram. I shared that with her privately on a weekend, and she was stunned.
So you just turned this into a 3-dimensional theory, right?
Yes. So there were two cover-ups. They were covering up a virus, and on March... So have you seen the video where everything changes on March 11th? Have you seen that video? Everything changes. Everything changes. The whole tone coming from the White House and the media changes March 11th.
I had a great conversation last night with President Xi. I really believe they are going to have it under control fairly soon. You know, in April, supposedly it dies with the hotter weather.
The Centers for Disease Control says the coronavirus is going to spread in the United States, but the White House today said that it's contained.
Our country couldn't accept or would not accept the implications of what we were finding.
One person with coronavirus in King County, Washington State, has died.
9 Americans now have died. 11 people have died from coronavirus.
Tonight, the first containment zone here in America within a 1-mile radius in the New York suburb of New Rochelle.
And then suddenly here it was in our own community.
Here's what's making headlines on this March 11th.
Good morning on this Wednesday, March 11th.
Wednesday, March 11th.
Hope you guys are exhaling, taking a minute for yourselves in the midst of all the chaos and confusion.
I just looked at my notes from that day, and it was a most unusual day. I was testifying before the House Energy and Commerce Oversight and Reform hearing, and during that hearing, I said,
we will see more cases, and things will get worse than they are right now. How much worse we'll get will depend on our ability to do two things: to contain the influx in people who are infected coming from the outside, and the ability to contain and mitigate within our own country. Bottom line, it's going to get worse.
I had to say it because it was the truth.
On March 11th, it became real for the entire country.
That's just when so many people just said, it's time to take this very seriously.
Yo, this is more serious than I thought it was.
March 11th, we knew that the WHO were going to call it a pandemic.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
The vice president was initially going to do the press conference, but then we were told that the president would be doing the address, and it just kept getting pushed, and it eventually turns into an Oval address that night.
To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days.
Okay,
And
I
you're
appreciate
like,
it.
what the hell happened last night that all of a sudden the president's now taking this seriously? We're going to declare a national emergency in all 50 states. We've never done this in history.
This is Don't Look Up.
It is Don't Look Up. It is Don't Look Up. That's the whole point here.
Good afternoon. Let's go straight to the Rose Garden. President Trump about to hold a news conference on the coronavirus crisis. There you see him, Vice President Mike Pence.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful day in the Rose Garden. Appreciate everybody being here. Today, I'd like to provide an update to the American people on several decisive new actions we're taking in our very vigilant effort to combat and ultimately defeat the coronavirus. We've been working very hard on this. We've made tremendous progress. When you compare what we've done to other areas of the world, it's pretty incredible. A lot of that had to do with the early designation and the closing of the borders. And as you know, Europe was just designated as the hotspot right now, and we closed that border a while ago. So that was lucky, or through talent, or through luck, call it whatever you want. But through a very collective action and shared sacrifice, national determination, we will overcome the threat of the virus. I also announced Wednesday night, following the advice of our medical professionals, who are doing a tremendous job, and we appreciate it very much, that we're suspending the entry of foreign nationals who have been to Europe in the last 14 days from entering the United States. Citizens, permanent residents, and our families, any of the families returning from Europe, will be subject to extra screening as well as self-isolation for a period of 14 days. As the World Health Organization confirmed today, many of the things that what we said were 100% correct, including our designation.
And I'm sharing it with Laura Ingraham, and Laura Ingram's looking at it and going, you've got to be kidding me. And she's freaking out because he didn't tell her, because they were kind of close. And she wasn't read into the program. She didn't know until I showed it to her. And that freaked her out, was that she wasn't going to be told. April 27th of 2020. We were facing.
Was that the Nigerian? Was that the Nigerian hit?
The Nigerian one was March 28th. So here's your timeline.
Okay.
Trump declares the emergency on March 13th. Everything changed 2 days earlier. So March 11th, the media changes their tone. The White House changes their tone. And by Friday, he declares a national emergency. FEMA's in charge. Basically, the head of NORAD is the guy in charge of the government at this point. And that's what happened. You know, these events occurred, right? So it's a matter of record at JPL. So NASA's JPL keeps track of near-Earth objects, NEOs, and there's a log of all of this activity. So again, it's not speculation. What happened was on April the 28th, I was modeling and looking at it and saying, my God, this looks somewhat remarkable. It's like all these objects coming together at Earth on the 27th. And it was the 28th that I shared it with Laura Ingraham over Skype. We watched this together. I'll send you the video and you'll get to see it. But the net of it is, if there was an extinction level event on April 27th, and they were going to deploy field hospitals in the event of an impact anywhere and anywhere, meaning it could hit Toronto, and we would maybe need to do stuff in, Minnesota, right? Who knows, or Buffalo.
Right.
So an impact in Toronto could affect Buffalo. So they deployed field hospitals across the entire country. There weren't 200 people dead from coronavirus. The hell are they doing that for?
I'd have to think about this one. This one's complicated.
Perfect cover up. Perfect cover up.
To the extent that they tore them down on May 1st is absolutely unreconcilable with respect to the virus. I agree with that, because if you got a pandemic and you're going, we don't really understand what's happening. And then by May 1st, they were claiming not to understand what was happening still.
Well,
you wouldn't tear down the field hospitals. You wouldn't tear them down.
Whether or not, we can absolutely say for sure, it's hard. We have to use inductive reasoning here because we're not going to be shown all the evidence. They're hiding stuff from us. But
that I'm clear on.
Right. But what we know for sure is that the event occurred. We have the data from JPL. Like you see it, it's not like it's not a predictive model. It's a historic model, right? So we get to see it in 3D and see everything coming together. So the event happened and the impact in Akure, Nigeria happened. That's not a theory, right? So that happened. Whether or not the field hospitals were about that, or
could you send me a link to the field hospitals being taken down? That's something that helps me with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
I appreciate that.
And we built them all over the world, right? So they had what do they call it? NHS Nightingale on Thames, 4,000 beds, no patients. They didn't treat anybody. This was
and they were torn down. That's the
I think in the UK they stood another 10 days or 2 weeks, but nobody kept them up for longer than 30 days. Yeah, they were
based on the chatter. You would have assumed that they'd say, "Look, just in case we need them, we should leave them there." Okay.
Obviously, keep them up for 6 months, 9 months, or whatever, until obviously the thing has waned. But 11 days. The largest call-up of the National Guard, and the impact in Akure, Nigeria. Why was that a secret? How did Anderson Cooper miss that? He didn't think it was. When you see how many stories there are about, an asteroid's coming, it's the size of the Eiffel Tower, an asteroid's coming, it's the size of a school bus, an asteroid's coming, it's the size of Pizza Hut. And then when one actually hits, they don't cover it.
Unfiltered. We've all seen these disaster movies showing asteroids, comets hitting the planet, but could something crazy like that actually happen? Here to give us a dose of reality is Professor of Physics at UC Santa Barbara, Philip Lubin. Philip, thanks a lot for taking the time. We really appreciate it. So if one of these things, these comets or asteroids, were to hit Earth, what would it look like? Is it even possible that this could happen in our lifetime or in coming generations?
Well, it's a question of timescale, Dan. This has happened before. Our previous tenants, the dinosaurs, exited because of this. And it will happen again in the future. It's not a question of if it will happen, it's a question of when. And it's also a question of scale. We get hit every day by about 100 tons of material coming in, but it's very small. It doesn't really even we don't even notice it. Once in a while, like in 2013, Charlie Benz got hit by a 20 meter. And in 1908, Tunguska got hit by about a 65 meter, which wiped out a fair amount of trees, but didn't kill anybody.
But a couple questions for you just to wrap this up. What would it actually look like if one of these bigger ones, God forbid, were to hit? And second, do we have the technology now to detect these things? There's things I want to worry about, things I don't. If you tell me, yeah, we can detect it, all right, I'll worry about it a little less. Philip, last question for you. Say we do detect one of these things. You can tell like this is on my mind. Say we do detect one of these big ones coming in.
I got it.
Yeah, I know. Maybe I've seen too many movies. Is there the technology out there, nuclear weapons, whatever it may be? Is there any way to divert them from our path? Do we have that?
Why would you hide a pandemic? Why would you hide the impact of an asteroid if it's a once in every 10,000 year event? Unless you were expecting more of them.
Okay.
There's a movie that was coming out that summer called Greenland about a comet that breaks up and the pieces of the comet start raining down on Earth and all hell breaks loose.
Is this Clark, this interstellar comet?
Right? I mean,
yeah, big news.
I don't see Clark.
Oh, maybe he's still sleeping.
Dad.
Some of Clark's larger fragments are now expected to enter our atmosphere.
That's right, and others are just... What are they saying?
More of the same.
I bet you it's gonna make a heck of a show.
Whoa. Where are they going?
I don't know.
When the first chunks is about to hit.
Hit?
Only part of it. It's going in the ocean.
Would you look at that?
Wait, where's the explosion?
We now are getting word that the fragment has hit Central Florida.
Oh my God.
Wait, are some more pieces gonna hit?
Come on, let's go.
But the sky's on fire.
2 days. They got it all wrong. There's a ton of fragments. Planet killers.
Space agencies are predicting an extinction level event.
I know you will, son.
If you are hearing this broadcast, seek shelter immediately.
What is it? What's going on?
If you are hearing this broadcast, seek shelter
John, go!
immediately. Seek shelter immediately.
Hang on, Nathan.
Seek shelter immediately. Seek shelter immediately.
The trailer for that movie was pulled from the internet when I reported the story to Laura. So I share the thing with Laura, and all of a sudden the trailer for the movie Greenland about a comet crashing to Earth and, you know, raining rocks basically disappears from the internet. I was like, why would you guys ghost the trailer as if it didn't exist? That's kind of suspicious behavior. I don't know to read much into it. But again, the JPL date is there. The ELE event was April 27th of 2020. The impact in Akure, Nigeria was March 28th, 2020. And we put all the hospitals away May 1st. So whether or not...
the debris, therefore, was whizzing past the Earth for almost a month then by that model, right?
I'm sorry, say that again?
The debris was whizzing past the Earth for quite a while by that model. Is that correct? The debris, that the 30 or so chunks of shit that one of them hit Nigeria.
The one that hit Nigeria was sort of a precursor of the cloud. In other words, the cloud of them was April 27th. The one that hits March 28th.
So they all came the same day.
Yeah, the March 28th, they weren't expecting it. It hits in Nigeria, and they're like, uh-oh. This is starting sooner than we think. So then they started looking and... Yeah, it's starting sooner than we... Keep in mind that with these asteroids...
Have you found a JPL type person who
they all went into hiding. They all went into hiding. All the B612 org guys, all the Meteor guys disappeared. And remember, they closed all the observatories. It's like, what the hell? Why are you closing the observatories?
None of this is familiar.
Yeah, they closed all the observatories. And it was like, guys, it's a respiratory infection that hasn't killed 10 people in Shanghai. So you're closing all the observatories? The hell does that have to do with the price of tea in China? It doesn't add up. They put all the airplanes away, Dave. Remember we put the airplanes into storage. How many people were dead in the United States when we did that? less than 200. So we put the planes away? Are we going to do that? If monkeypox got to 200 dead, were we going to put the planes away again? We were afraid it was going to start raining rocks. So we put the planes away and we built field hospitals until the danger of it raining rocks went away. Don't Look Up was real. It happened. And
that's a great movie. That was a great movie.
And so the irony of it is that the people who are in the movie think that it's really about the climate crisis, right? And that it's a metaphor. And I'm sitting there going, no, it's not a metaphor. It happened April 27th of 2020. And I'll send you the footage for the JPL model. You're going to flip. It happened.
I'd love to see it.
Yeah, whether the field hospitals were for that or they really were for overflow COVID patients for 10 days. Hard for me to say, but I think that the likelihood is probably that they've got some secret plan that they don't want the public to panic. Do you remember how they didn't even want people on the roads? You weren't allowed to drive around from town to town at one point in different places.
I just attributed that to a bunch of power hungry neo-Nazi types.
Nobody was dead. Now, again, you insert this straw man hypothesis into that placeholder and you say, well, wait a second. If there was an extinction level event on April 27th, does that explain the crazy behavior? Get everybody off the roads, put the airplanes away, build field hospitals. Does that make more sense than there's a respiratory virus that hasn't killed 10 people in Shanghai? So we're going to put the airplanes away.
Well, but putting them away statistically doesn't decrease the probability of them being damaged. What it does is it makes it decreases the probability of a hit and increases the damage of a hit, right?
Well,
my math tells me
it decreases the likelihood that it will be hit while airborne 100%.
Well,
right.
Definitely that.
Right.
Definitely
well, that's
that.
what they're afraid of. That's what they're afraid of.
But we were in the middle of a scary pandemic, and so the idea of putting people on planes didn't make sense. I was in charge of
Perfect cover story.
But I was in charge of things, and at one point I tweeted something about some meeting getting canceled. I said no one wants to hold the meeting of death, so they're all being canceled. And statistics or stats or whatever, there's a journal by that name, repeated the tweet.
Oh my God!
And so so now everyone wanted to just go straight to hunker down. So putting the planes away seems fully consistent with the. I don't think you need the meteor shower to explain most of that. I don't understand the.
You do because of the timing. You do because of the timing, and the
that could just be coincidence, right? I mean, that really could be. The fact that it arrived is coincidence. So you got to assume there's a coincidence, anyways. There is a coincidence.
Well, absolutely. In other words, prior to March 10th, I don't think anybody knew anything about the meteors. Nobody knew anything was happening with meteors before March 10th. It was just coronavirus and this other pandemic, and that's what was happening. March 10th, they come to the president, Mr. President, NORAD, we got to show you this. This does not look good. This does not look good, sir. April 27th, we got a projection here. The models are showing us this, and what do you want us to do? Well, we have a plan to deploy field hospitals. Why don't we just tell everybody it's for the COVID thing and we don't panic anybody? And if nothing happens, nothing happens. We don't need to panic everybody. I got enough on their plate. And they deploy the field hospitals and tell everybody it's for COVID overflow. And it's real easy cover story. We're in the midst of it already. There's no need to panic everybody. I mean, nothing may hit.
Well, okay.
Right. So we may have zero impact.
Right.
So then one hits Akure, one hits in Nigeria, and now they're taking it real seriously. Now, all of a sudden, all of the, the naysayers who are like, yeah, asteroid my ass. Come on.
How big was the Nigerian one? How big was it?
I'll send you some pictures. The hole in the ground, I think, is 60 meters across, 180 feet.
That's a pretty big one.
It's pretty. Again, it's bigger than anything you've seen in the last 10,000 years. Anything that's bigger than
Was
this.
that right? Is that right?
Yeah. Oh,
is that
yeah,
right?
yeah. Anything that's bigger than this was historic and is, you know.
You got to find someone from JPL or something. You got to get someone.
Do you know anybody?
Do you
know any astrophysicists or astronomers?
I know Steve Squires, who ran the Mars rover program.
Yeah.
But I don't think he'd want to get involved in this
Just
story.
ask him. Say, if you said, Steve, what the hell is this in Akure, Nigeria? How the hell did they keep this secret? I'm looking at a hole in the ground here. How is this not a story? Time magazine didn't think this was interesting. National Geographic didn't want to go to Akure, Nigeria and look at the hole in the ground?
Who covered it? Who did cover it? What's the
local guys with camera phones posting on YouTube, and I got footage.
So the off Broadway crowd, right?
Oh yeah.
An explosion that occurred at about 1 a.m. this morning in Iluabo, a suburb of Akure located along Akure-Owo Expressway, has led to the damage of several houses around the area. Governor Rotimi Akeredolu led top government officials to the scene. He advised that people should move away from there in order to be safe.
We will advise all citizens, all residents of Ondo State not to come near this place at all. It happened about 1. Virtually all of us in Akure had this.
ó lè ṣe pipeline. gbogbo àkúrẹ́ lájú pàtàkì.
ṣé kó wọ́n lè gbẹ́ títì lélẹ̀ ọ̀rọ̀ yóò yé mi.
ṣé wọ́n gbẹ́ títì báyìí ni wọ́n gbẹ́ títì báyìí.
ó yé mi ni ó ṣe pé nǹkan lè jẹ́ kọ̀ọ̀kan jù lélẹ̀ mú láì lọ ọdún láì lọ oṣù ní 30 minutes.
My buddies.
I'd love to see some of this. I'd love to see this case.
Yeah, you're gonna flip out.
I'm fine. I Aristotle said, an educated man can entertain an idea without endorsing it.
Exactly. And that's all I want you to do. I just want you to look at the evidence.
So I do want to see the evidence.
Yeah. Which of these narratives fits the deployment better? And the issue here is the number of people that were dead at the time that they did the field hospitals and the time they put the planes away. When we put the planes away, I don't think there were 75 people dead in America.
When you say put the planes away, you mean just stop flying?
Yeah, there was a story about a pilot who, when they restarted flying 6 months later, he gets out to the boneyard or whatever they call it, where they stored these things in the desert. There was a note in the cockpit from the previous guy saying, hey, we're parking these things, and it was March 24th or something. Basically, it's the week after he declares this national emergency.
Okay, so your claim of putting the planes away, it was a metaphorical. It wasn't literally away. It's just stop flying. Put them in a hole.
Put them in the desert. Yeah, they put them out in the desert.
Okay,
and they capped up the engines.
I thought you were saying they put them inside a building or grouped them together. No. That's different.
No. They were all over the tarmac, and they kind of stacked them, packed them. But again, they did this all over the world. This was a global phenomenon. And when they did it, there just weren't that many people dead. It's like, wait.
But the mentality of COVID is certainly consistent with no. That's right. Which therefore means you don't have to invoke the asteroid model. Or whatever.
Correct. Right. Isn't that fabulous? Right. So
therefore you have to. So it depends. You don't have to invoke the asteroids to explain the planes being put away or to explain the hospitals. Again, I'm troubled by the hospitals being taken down May 1st. forget the asteroid story. I'm troubled that everyone just blew it all clear on the field hospitals. That doesn't make sense to me. I would have, you'd say, leave them up. If we need to staff them, we don't want to have to build these again.
Right.
So just leave them there for now.
Exactly. So then you start
looking. So that's a mystery.
And you start looking then for alternate explanations. And you say, all right.
I get it.
Why else might you do this?
Send me information on the hospitals being torn down that fast. I really want to see that, because it's a fun story.
Yeah. No, you're
I like fun stories better than...
Yeah.
And I'm getting guff on Twitter for being pissed off about Tucker Carlson being kicked off. We should talk about this briefly before we go. I just want to wedge this in here.
Sure.
Tucker was the most popular guy on TV. They just fired him. Yeah. Last week, I could not understand why Fox settled with Dominion.
Right.
And the reason I couldn't understand is because that's the kind of a case where a legitimate news organization would take it to the Supreme Court.
Right.
And they didn't. And they settled for a whopping hunk of money. And I think that they settled to hang it on Tucker to get his ass off the air. I think someone paid $700 million to get him off the air. Now, the question then becomes why? And the answer is, well, first of all, he gripes about everything the deep state hates him griping about.
Yeah.
I've always wondered how he kept his job. Now that he's lost it, I'm even more shocked, even though I was shocked that he kept his job.
Right.
But the point being is, I think the Dominion settlement might have been to say he cost us too much. He had to go. Don't get mad at us. That's life in the big leagues. And I don't think that's what would have happened. When the Dominion settlement went through, I'm going, something's wrong with the story. Tucker being fired now connects to me the Dominion story with Tucker. And it bothers the hell out of me. And some people on Twitter are saying, what are you throwing a tantrum about? I'm throwing a tantrum because this is Stalinism, Nazism, you name it. This is authoritarianism, kicking the most popular TV talking head off the air. What if Tucker is about to run for office? What if he launches? Well, that's fascinating. Yeah. That's been mentioned. But what if the alternative model is shit's about to get very real and they don't want him near the airwaves? Well, there could be that. Right. I mean, for all I know, I mean, you and I talked about the FBI and and how we then learned that Twitter, that they're reading our DMs, right? So we learned that after the fact, that our private DMs, the FBI's got access to it. It could be that he was getting ready to report on something that they just said, that's it, cut up, that can't have that. Right. What if he was? That's what I mean by getting very real. There's something that they need. What if he watched our show? What if he watched our interview from a week ago and he watched the Vegas thing with you and he said, I don't think we're that important. It's not that we're important. It's the story is important. I know, but he was talking about Vegas in very serious terms back when it happened. I was watching a show every night. He was going balls to the wall on the Vegas shooting being wrong.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We're broadcasting this evening in unseasonably cold weather from Las Vegas, site of the deadliest mass shooting in American history. It's been 2 months since Stephen Paddock murdered 58 people. It happened right behind where I'm sitting right now. And despite a lengthy and expensive investigation, a huge number of unanswered questions, some of them the most basic questions about that shooting, remain unanswered. We've come here in a search for answers, and we're going to devote a portion of the show to that in a minute. But first, it's among the great ironies in recent history, certainly the recent history of American criminal justice, an FBI probe begun to find corruption in government may simply have exposed corruption within the FBI itself. In the last few days, we've learned a great deal about a man called Peter Strzok. Until recently, Strzok was deputy head of counterintelligence at the FBI. For the past 2 years, he was central to investigations into both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Last summer, Strzok was abruptly pulled off Robert Mueller's team of investigators. This didn't become public for months, but it happened. The FBI won't explain why it happened, even when asked directly by the Congress. Now we know it happened because Strzok was sending highly political text messages to his mistress, who also worked at the FBI, messages praising Hillary Clinton and denigrating Donald Trump. Now, why does this matter exactly? Well, because everything about Peter Strzok's job was essentially political. Strzok was the man who signed off on starting the current Russia investigation, the one that has totally overtaken the federal government. Strzok was also the official who altered James Comey's statement to avoid criminally implicating Hillary Clinton in her now famous server investigation. In other words, Strzok's political opinions mattered. In fact, they may have changed American history. And to illustrate it, consider this. Consider how Agent Strzok handled two different series of interviews in criminal investigations.
And so I don't think it's the Vegas story. So then the question is, what's coming down the pike, which they said we cannot have Tucker on the air. So I'm predicting something but ugly's coming. Of course, there's always something but ugly coming. And they needed once and for all to get him out of there, and they needed an excuse. So they came up with a $700 million excuse. You say, oh, Fox would never pay that. I said, if you think Fox is on the air for money, you're dreaming. Fox is on the air. Every network is on the air for a reason that has nothing to do with revenue. Nothing to do with revenue. The CIA could buy every channel. This is about politics, right? This is politics. So Tucker's now off the air. I think it's a horrifying turn of events.
I'm curious, but I feel
game
like
over.
I feel like the second shoe has yet to fall. I'm really curious where he's going to end up, and what
he could do more damage.
Right,
he could do more damage.
I'm curious what this looks like in 2 weeks. So I'm going to reserve judgment. I think he's, in an interesting spot right now, and we're going to see how this plays out. Clearly, the settlement with Dominion, $800 million settlement, roughly. A lot of people were looking at this sort of sideways and saying, "What the hell was that all about?"
A lot of people also don't know that Dominion is owned by China. Dominion tracks. First of all, Dominion's tracks to Canada, which means our voting machines were controlled by Canadians. Mm-hmm. But Dominion is a subsidiary of UBS, which the subsidiary is majority owned by a company in Beijing. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you make that connection, you go, holy moly. So our voting machines are being run by a company in Beijing. Mm-hmm. Someone explained to me how that's remotely a good idea.
Yeah. Well, and in particular, you look at the climate when this decision was made to settle just a week or 10 days ago. Somebody who, quite frankly, I'm not that fond of his reporting, but
yeah, I don't care about his reporting being good or bad. I care that they took the most popular guy off, who was the only guy who would say shit that people would be.
No, I'm not talking about Tucker.
Shocked by.
I'm not talking about Tucker. I was prefacing. I was going to mention the guy from Project Veritas, O'Keefe.
Oh yeah, O'Keefe. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't like the whole dating setup way of reporting. That's not my style. But he did a thing. But he did a thing recently where they went to Maryland. Pfizer. Did you see the thing where he went to Maryland? And they went to people's houses and they said, "Hey, you're Mary Smith at 355 whatever, whatever." Yeah. And they said, "Well, according to the Democratic such and such, it says that you donated $37,000."
Right.
Is that
I remember
true?
that.
And she's like, "What? What the hell are you talking about? I don't give a 30 cents. I give $5." And they go and meet all these different people. And the thing says, it says you gave $17,000, $20,000, $40,000. And the people are like, what the hell are you talking about? I didn't give anybody $27,000 for a political thing.
I remember that. But he also went after Pfizer too. That wasn't.
But that's different. What I'm suggesting here is that in a climate where it looks like there might be monkey business going on with campaign funding.
Yeah.
Monkey business, right? We had the 2,000 mules thing from Dinesh. None of that plays into any of this. Like we're just going to throw in the white towel for $800 million. None of that other research, none of it mattered, huh? None of it factored in. I don't know. I had evidence of certain things happening in Georgia that when I tried to publish it, my videos got struck as if it was hate speech or, whatever the hell they categorize it. And it was simply watching tallies. That's all I was doing. But it wouldn't have it. So I felt that was odd. I'm interested to see how this plays out. I want to see where he ends up, how he, where he lands, all that kind of thing.
That'll be, and here's the $1 million question. If he ends up and he looks neutered, that's fundamentally different than if he ends up someplace and he goes full Joe Rogan like, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so we'll be watching whether or not he dials shit back.
Indeed.
Or whether he's now absolutely not harnessed, and that'll tell us whether he cut a deal.
All right, here's my crazy prediction. This is a 1 in a million prediction.
All ears.
He and Tulsi Gabbard form a new party, and he launches a campaign with her.
Well, so my crazy prediction is Tulsi Gabbard as VP on DeSantis's ticket.
I think Tucker's ticket.
Well,
I'll bet you $1. I'll bet you $1.
No.
I'll bet you $1.
Okay, well,
we'll do a trading. We'll do a trading. We'll do trading
buck.
places. Okay, we'll do trading places.
I'll bet that's exactly.
I think it's Tucker and Tulsi. I think you get Tucker and Tulsi.
I think you have a lower probability bet. You have a lower probability bet that's more entertaining.
All right, let's see how it plays out, my friend.
We'll see, and then if one of us wins, you got to cut a clip out of here
for sure
and post it.
Oh, hell yeah.
Okay.
Of course I will.
Oh,
I can't thank you enough one more time for coming on the show. I know,
we still haven't talked about a whole bunch of other topics. So
I know, but we're going hours and hours and hours here.
We're working on them. We're working on them.
I hope this was informative and entertaining to you.
Oh, absolutely.
To see all this new stuff, and that it opens up, another possibility here that potentially there were 2 pandemics.
So I want to talk Ukraine at some point if you got it in you, and I want to talk climate change at some point if you got it in you.
Sure, let's do it.
Anything else you want to talk about? Because there are not many things that don't crawl up my ass and make a buzzing sound. So
we should do the Ukraine thing, because it was Friday the 25th of February that I went to the U.S. Embassy's website in Ukraine, and I found the documents from the Department of Defense confirming what we were doing, and they were hidden. They were already gone from the website. So I used the archive.org thing and went back 2 weeks in time to get the documents. And I downloaded them all. And next thing you know, I'm getting contacted by Russian news agencies that want to know, you got the documents from the embassy? I was like, yeah, I got them. So I'll tell you that story next time.
Your experience at Oracle makes you a great digital sleuth. I don't have that. I don't have any of that skill. And
I'm just lucky. I just work
enough
hours.
How your brain works.
I work enough hours. I get lucky. You work hard enough, long enough, you luck out from time to time. And I just
there's a million topics we can hammer on for hours at a time. So I'm game.
All right, this was great. I can't thank you enough for joining me again. And let me know what your thoughts are. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
I tell you my thoughts as we go.
Exactly.
Send me the shit. I'll tell you my thoughts after you send me a bunch of those things.
You got it. All right, you got a whole bunch coming. All right, buddy. Thanks a million.
Adios.
All right.
Talking a mad game. Wish I was sipping on what you were having. You play it up, it's a method, a habit. I hear it all the time, but nothing that you're doing can back it. Here we go again. Oh. stop. I make the money and I can't stop.